Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was sent to Akame ga Kill and got married to Esdeath, Akame, and Leone? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Stranger in the North. The end was not an explosion. It was a silent, blinding release. One moment, Naruto Uzumaki was suspended in the stark, alien gravity of Kagaya's dimension, his palm pressed against the otherworldly flesh of the rabbit goddess alongside Sasuke's. The raw, divine energies of sun and moon, yin and yang, converged. The six paths planetary devastation ripped rock from the barren ground, sealing the source of all chakra into a new, silent moon. Victory, exhaustion, profound and bone-deep, washed over him. He saw Sakura's tear-streaked face, Kakashi's weary but relieved eye. Sasuke's flicker of a smile, a real one, this time. They had done it. They had saved the world. The next moment, the universe screamed. It wasn't a sound his ears could process, but a vibration that shook his very soul. The freshly sealed moon, the prison of a god, pulsed with an unstable, violent light. A fissure, not in the rock but in the fabric of space itself, cracked open beneath them. It didn't look like Kakashi's Kamui or Sasuke's Rinnegan portal. This was wrong. It was a wound in reality, bleeding pure, chaotic energy. Naruto. Sasuke's voice, sharp with alarm. He felt a pull, an inexorable tide of force that his Sage of Six Paths power, for all its might, couldn't anchor him against. Kurama roared within him, a maelstrom of furious chakra trying to fight the current, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with a fishing net. Hang on, Naruto yelled, his hand slipping. The triumphant connection with his team, his world, was being violently severed. He saw Sasuke reach for him, his Rinnegan spinning wildly, trying to lock onto his location. He saw Sakura's horrified gasp. He saw Kakashi, already moving to help. They were too far. The fissure widened, and the pull became a cataclysmic vortex. His senses, usually a hyper-aware symphony of life energy, were flooded with static. He was being torn, unwritten, rewritten. His last sensation of his home dimension was the fading warmth of his friend's chakra signatures and the sharp, desperate sting of Sasuke's, a final, failed attempt to grab hold. Then, there was only the tearing. A sensation of being pulled through. An infinitely dense and utterly empty void. Colors that had no name flashed across his vision. He felt his physical form deconstruct and reconstruct 1,000 times a second. It was an agony beyond pain. A disorientation beyond confusion. And then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. He fell. The landing wasn't a crash or a thud. It was a deep, soft impact into something that yielded with a muffled crunch. Cold. A brutal, invasive cold that seeped through his tattered clothing and shocked his system more than any lightning jutsu ever had. He lay there, face down, his mind a fractured mess. The world was blessedly, terrifyingly silent. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed. The first coherent thought to pierce the fog was a simple, primal one: breathe. He took a ragged breath, and the air burned his lungs. It was thin, sharp, and achingly frigid. He pushed a hand into the substance beneath him. It was white, powdery, and deep. Snow. He'd seen snow before in the land of iron, but this felt different. Older, more relentless. With a groan that seemed to tear from the very bottom of his soul, Naruto pushed himself onto his hands and knees. His head swam. His chakra coils felt frayed. Not just depleted, but like wires that had been subjected to a massive, uncontrolled power surge. Kurama was silent, not in the angry, brooding way he sometimes was, but in a deep, dormant state of recovery. The fox had shielded the worst of the dimensional transit, and it had cost him dearly. Naruto forced himself to his feet, swaying. He did a quick mental and physical inventory. Tattered remains of his jacket and pants. One arm of his jacket was completely gone, revealing the sun-kissed skin now pale in the cold. His forehead protector was gone. His gear pouch was gone. All he had was what he was wearing and the truth of the power that resided within him. He was alive. That was a start. He looked up. The sky was a pale, unforgiving gray, a solid ceiling of cloud from horizon to horizon. There was no sun. Jagged, black-toothed mountains clawed at the sky in the distance, their peaks shrouded in a perpetual mist of blowing snow. All around him was an endless, rolling expanse of white, broken only by the dark skeletons of gnarled, leafless trees. This wasn't home. The chilling certainty of it settled in his stomach like a block of ice. The air didn't taste right. The natural energy, the very lifeblood of the world that a sage like him could feel as easily as breathing, was muted. Faint and strange. Sasuke. Sakura-chan, he called out, his voice hoarse. The sound was swallowed by the vast, oppressive silence. The wind whispered back, a lonely, mournful sound. He was alone. Utterly, completely alone. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to rise in his throat. He ruthlessly suppressed it. Panic was a luxury. He was a shinobi. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He'd faced down gods and monsters. He would not be beaten by a little snow and a lot of quiet. First rule of survival: assess the situation. He was drained, but not helpless. He closed his eyes, sinking into sage mode. It took more effort than usual, the natural energy sluggish to respond, but it came. The orange pigmentation appeared around his eyes. The world snapped into a new kind of focus. He could feel the life force of the hardy, half-frozen lichens on the distant rocks. He could sense the faint warmth of a burrowing Kree, a tur deep beneath the snow dozens of meters away. And he could sense them. A cluster of life signatures. At least 30 of them. Moving with purpose. Moving towards him. They were several kilometers out. Their energy signatures flickering with aggression and desperation. Hostiles. Naruto let sage mode fade, conserving his strength. He needed to find civilization, information. But if they were looking for a fight, he wouldn't be able to avoid it. He stood his ground, a lone, dark figure in a world of white, and waited. The wind whipped his golden hair around his face, and for the first time, he felt the true, biting promise of the cold. He had to end this fast. They came over the rise not as a disciplined army, but as a horde. Men and women wrapped in thick, crude furs, their faces smeared with blue and white war paint. They wielded rough-hewn axes, spiked clubs, and crude spears. Their eyes, when they saw him, burned with a mixture of hatred and surprise. They had been tracking something, but they clearly hadn't expected to find a lone man in strange, thin clothing standing calmly in the middle of a snowfield. One of them, a massive bear of a man with a braided, graying beard and an axe that looked like it could fell a tree in one swing, stepped forward. Imperial dog, did you lose your way from your pack? Your masters sent you here to die, and we will be happy to oblige. Imperial, masters, the words meant nothing to him. Naruto held up a hand, a universal gesture of peace. I don't want any trouble. I'm just looking for a town. His calm response seemed to enrage them further. The leader let out a guttural laugh. Hear that, boys? The pup is lost. Don't worry, we'll give you a permanent home 6 feet under this snow. He pointed his axe at Naruto. Your kind has RNEDR villages and salted our fields for the last time. For the northern tribes, charge. The roar that erupted from the 30 warriors was primal. They surged forward, a wave of fur and steel, ire boots churning the snow into a frenzy. Naruto sighed. It was always like this. He had hoped, just for a moment, that he had landed in a world without this endless, stupid cycle. He dropped into a low, relaxed stance. His center of gravity perfect. His chakra was low, but for this, he wouldn't need it. This was a job for pure, unadulterated skill. The first warrior reached him, swinging a heavy club in a wide, telegraphed arc. Naruto didn't even look at him. He shifted his weight, letting the club whistle past his ear. In the same fluid motion, his hand shot out, striking the man's wrist with 2 fingers. The crack of bone was sharp and clear. The man screamed, the club falling from his nerveless grasp. A follow-up palm heel strike to the chest sent the man flying backward into 2 of his comrades, a perfect, non-lethal strike that had knocked the wind from his lungs and would keep him down for a while. 2 more came at him from the sides with spears. Naruto dropped, his hands planted in the snow, and swept his leg in a powerful circle. Both spearmen had their feet knocked out from under them. As they fell, he was already moving, flowing around an axe swing and delivering a prek. Eyes chopped to the back of the attacker's neck. The man went down, unconscious before he hit the ground. It was a dance. A brutal, efficient ballet of avoidance and neutralization. He was a whisper in the storm of their attack. He ducked under a wild swing, his hand grabbing the man's arm and using his momentum to throw him into another attacker. He sidestepped a lunge, tapping a pressure point on E-man's shoulder that rendered his entire arm useless. He flowed between them, a golden-haired phantom, his movements economical and devastatingly effective. To the northern tribesmen, it was terrifying. This wasn't a man, it was a demon. He was everywhere at once. They swung at air, they hit their own allies. His face remained a mask of calm concentration, his blue eyes holding no malice, only a profound, weary disappointment. He wasn't fighting them. He was dismantling them. In less than a minute, 25 of the 30 warriors were on the ground, groaning, disarmed, or unconscious. The remaining 5, including the leader, stood frozen, their chests heaving, their eyes wide with disbelief and terror. The leader stared at the strange, orange markings that had appeared around Naruto's eyes. He had slipped back into sage mode for a split second to anticipate the final, desperate charge. What are you? The leader stammered, his bravado gone. Someone who's tired of fighting, Naruto said, his voice flat. He took a step forward. The remaining 5 stumbled back as one. Now, are you going to tell me where the nearest settlement is, or do we have to continue this? Before the leader could answer, a new sound cut through the air. A low, rhythmic crunching, far heavier than footsteps. It was the sound of a disciplined, marching force. And with it came a feeling that made the hairs on Naruto's neck stand up. A pressure. A wave of cold, predatory intent so powerful it was a physical force. It was nothing like the tribesmen's raw aggression. This was the honed, bottomless killing intent of a true monster. The northern tribesmen heard the marching too, and their fear turned to ashen despair. The Empire, one of them whispered. It's her. Naruto turned his head, his gaze sweeping toward the direction of the approaching force. Over the same rise the tribesmen had come from, a new column of figures appeared. These were soldiers, clad in pristine white and black uniforms, their armor polished. Their weapons gleaming. They moved with a chilling synchronicity, a machine of perfect obedience. But it wasn't the hundreds of soldiers that held his attention. It was the woman who walked at their head. She was tall and slender, yet commanded the space around her like a giant. A long, light blue mane of hair fell down her back. She wore a white general's uniform that seemed utterly impervious to the cold, a matching cap perched on her head. Her face was one of impossible, aristocratic beauty, with piercing blue eyes and a small, knowing smile on her lips. A black tattoo, a complex, sigil-like mark, was emblazoned on her chest, visible in the V of her uniform. The temperature, already frigid, plummeted. Ice crystals began to form in the air, glittering like malevolent dust. The very presence of this woman was changing the weather. She came to a halt about 50 meters away, her army fanning out silently behind her. Her gaze swept over the scene, the defeated tribesmen, the scattered weapons. And Naruto, standing alone in the center of it all. Her smile widened, a genuinely pleased, predatory expression. Well now, she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the snow. Clear and melodic as a winter bell, yet laced with absolute authority. It seems the reports were not an exaggeration. One man, holding off a Numa clan war party. I must confess, I was expecting someone larger. This was Esdeath, the Empire's strongest, the Ice Queen. Her reputation was a plague of terror across the northern lands. And right now, she looked utterly, completely delighted. One of her soldiers, a man with a brutish face and a sycophantic air, stepped forward. General Esdeath, he is an unknown. He may be a rebel spy. Shall we eliminate him and the rest of this trash? Esdeath didn't even look at her subordinate. Her eyes were locked on Naruto. Patience, liver. You don't slaughter a prize animal before you've had a chance to appreciate its quality. She took a few steps forward. The snow crunching delicately under her high-heeled boots. You, in the strange clothes. You fight with impressive skill, but you haven't killed any of them. Why? Naruto met her gaze. Her eyes were like shards of a frozen sea, beautiful and infinitely deep. And cold. So, So cold, he could feel the sheer, overwhelming power radiating from her. It wasn't chakra, it was something else, something alien. But it was just as potent. It tasted of ice and blood and absolute domination. They're not a threat anymore, Naruto stated simply. There was no reason to kill them. Esdeath laughed. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh of pure amusement. The sound was both beautiful and terrifying. No reason. They are the enemy. They stood against the Empire. Their very existence is reason enough. The weak are destined to be culled by the strong. It is the simple, unchanging law of the world. That's not a law, Naruto countered, his voice steady. It's an excuse, a justification for cruelty. The air crackled with tension. The soldiers behind Esdeath tensed, hands moving to their weapons. The defeated tribesmen looked between the two, a new, desperate hope flickering in their eyes. No one spoke to General Esdeath like that. No one lived after. But Esdeath didn't get angry. Her smile never faltered. If anything, it grew more intense, more focused. An excuse. An interesting philosophy. But philosophy is for the weak. The strong prove their beliefs through action. She unclipped the rapier that hung at her side, its hilt ornate, its blade thin and deadly. You possess great strength. I can feel it. It's like a sun buried under this snow. Show it to me. Show me the proof of your philosophy. If you can defeat me, perhaps I will consider your words. If not, she let the implication hang in the frozen air. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He was still drained. Kurama was still asleep. A full-powered fight against this woman would be difficult. But he had no choice. Retreat wasn't an option. Surrender was unthinkable. And besides, there was a part of him, the part that had thrived in battle his entire life, that was curious. This woman was strong. On the level of a cage, maybe more. He wanted to see what she could do. I told you, Naruto said, his hands slowly coming together in a familiar seal. I'm tired of fighting. A ball of brilliant blue chakra, spinning with furious intensity, materialized in his palm. The light of the Rasengan cast a stark blue glow on his determined face. But if you insist on getting in my way, I'll have to move you. Esdeath's eyes lit up with a feverish, ecstatic gleam. Yes, that's it. That's the look of someone who knows they can back up their words. She didn't charge. She simply raised her rapier. The temperature dropped another 20 degrees in a heartbeat. The air itself seemed to solidify. From the ground around Naruto, massive spikes of ice, each as thick as a tree trunk and sharp as a needle, erupted with explosive force. The attack was instantaneous, covering a 30-meter radius. It was meant to impale him from a dozen directions at once. Naruto acted on pure instinct. He leapt, propelling himself straight up with a burst of chakra to his feet. Below him, the ice spikes crashed into each other with the sound of a collapsing glacier. He was airborne, a perfect target. Weisnabel, Esdeath called out, a hint of playful cruelty in her tone. With a flick of her rapier, she launched a volley of dozens of smaller, razor-sharp icicles. They flew through the air like a swarm of deadly hornets, homing in on him. Naruto was still in the air. He couldn't dodge, so he didn't. He spun, swinging the Rasengan in a wide arc. Rasengan. The spinning sphere of chakra slammed into the icicle swarm. The collision was a chaotic explosion of force and light. Chakra and ice energy detonated, shredding the projectiles into a glittering cloud of harmless powder. But the force of the impact sent him tumbling backward through the air. He landed 50 meters away, skidding to a stop in the snow, his stance low. He was unharmed, but his mind was racing. She created that much ice, that fast, without hand seals. What is this power? Esdeath was practically glowing with excitement. Incredible. You neutralized it completely. What is that energy? It's magnificent. She pointed her rapier at him again. But that was just a warm-up. Let's see how you handle this. She stomped her foot. The entire snowfield for 100 meters in every direction began to tremble. A massive wall of solid, crystalline ice rose from the ground between them, soaring 50 feet into the air before curving forward, a colossal wave threatening to crash down and entomb him. Naruto knew a standard Rasengan wouldn't be enough. He needed more power, more cutting force. Kurama, I could really use a little help here, he thought, but there was only silence from within. Fine, he'd do it himself. He created a shadow clone. It was a struggle. His reserves were complaining loudly. The clone appeared, and they immediately got to work. One hand holding the base Rasengan, the other adding the complex wind nature transformation. The familiar, high-pitched shriek of 1,000 tiny blades filled the air as the sphere flattened and 4 large points erupted from its sides. Wind style. Rasenshuriken. He drew his arm back and hurled it. The spinning vortex of chakra flew through the air, a miniature star of destructive power, screaming towards the descending ice wave. Esdeath watched its approach, her smile finally fading into a look of genuine, focused intensity. She had never seen anything like it. The sheer density and destructive potential of that attack was on another level. This man was not just strong. He was a true monster. Just like her, the Rasenshuriken hit the ice wave. For a split second, there was silence. Then, the universe seemed to tear itself apart. A deafening explosion of wind and sound erupted from the point of impact. The colossal ice structure didn't just break, it was atomized. A hemispherical dome of swirling chakra and razor-sharp wind expanded outwards, disintegrating everything it touched. The shockwave blasted across the battlefield, a hurricane of force that sent Esdeath's soldiers tumbling and forced the general herself to brace, her coat whipping wildly around her. When the light faded, the landscape was changed. A perfect, 50-meter crater had been carved into the snowfield, the ground at its bottom scoured clean to the frozen earth. The ice wave was gone, replaced by a glittering mist of ice particles. And in the center of it all, Naruto stood, panting slightly, the orange pigmentation around his eyes fading. The exertion of a Rasenshuriken in his current state was significant. He had made his point. Esdeath stared, her breath catching in her throat. The sheer, unadulterated power of it was beautiful. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The man before her, panting from the effort, his golden hair glowing in the aftermath, was not just a worthy opponent. He was the one she had been searching for her entire life. A being of such overwhelming power that he could challenge her, match her, perhaps even surpass her. Her soldiers were picking themselves up, staring in mute terror at the crater. The surviving northern tribesmen were on their knees, bowing their heads, not in worship, but in sheer, primal awe of the power they had just witnessed. Naruto lowered his arm, his gaze locked on Esdeath. Is that enough? Or, do you want me to level those mountains next? The question was a challenge, a clear line drawn in the snow. Esdeath slowly, deliberately, sheathed her rapier. The click of the blade sliding home was the only sound. The intense cold she was projecting receded, the air returning to its natural, nearly brutal, temperature. She walked forward, her steps measured, her eyes never leaving his. She stopped just 10 feet away from him. Her gaze so intense it felt physical. It's enough, she said, her voice a low, throaty purr. The predatory excitement was gone, replaced by something deeper, something that bordered on reverence. You are strong, unbelievably strong. You fight not for conquest or slaughter, but to protect your ideals. You possess a power I have never witnessed. And you stand before me, having demonstrated that power. Without a trace of fear in your eyes. She took another step closer. I have been searching for so long. A man who could be my equal. A man who could tame me, or die trying. A man whose strength could finally satisfy me. A slow, genuine, almost shy smile bloomed on her face. It transformed her from a terrifying general into a breathtakingly beautiful woman. She was the most disarming thing Naruto had seen her do. I have decided, she declared, her voice ringing with the finality of a royal decree, loud enough for every soldier and every tribesman to hear. You will be mine. Naruto blinked. Of all the possible outcomes, another attack, a strategic retreat, an offer of a truce, that was the one thing he had not anticipated. What? You heard me, Esdeath said, her confidence surging back. Your name. Tell me your name. Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto. She tested the name on her tongue, savoring it. I am General Esdeath. And you, Naruto, are coming with me to the imperial capital. You will be my lover. Naruto's brain, which had successfully processed dimensional travel, ancient goddesses, and 100-foot ice walls, short-circuited. You're what? Hold on a minute. I'm not going anywhere with you, and I'm definitely not going to be that. Esdeath just chuckled, as if his protest was the most charming thing in the world. Oh, You're so amusing when you're flustered. You have a choice, of course. You can come with me as my treasured guest, where you will have anything you desire. Or you can refuse, and I will freeze you in a block of ice and carry you back to the capital as my trophy. You will still be mine, but you will be far less comfortable. The end result is the same. She gestured to her army. The soldiers, though still shaken, immediately snapped to attention, their weapons raised. They were a threat again, but not to him. He could sense their aim shifting to the downed tribesmen. And if you fight me, Esdeath added, her voice turning sharp and cold once more, my men will slaughter every last one of these northern savages while we are distracted. Your choice, Naruto. What is your philosophy worth? It was a perfect trap. He was caught between his own principles and her ruthless pragmatism. If he fought, these people he'd just saved would die. If he fled, they would die. She had him cornered, not with power, but with his own compassion. Naruto looked from the terrified faces of the tribesmen to the unwavering, expectant eyes of Esdeath. He was exhausted. He was in a world he didn't understand, facing a woman whose power was as immense as her cruelty. He needed time. He needed information. He needed to recover. And the only path to those things, as insane as it seemed, was forward, into the heart of the beast's den. He let out a long, weary sigh, the frustration and absurdity of the situation washing over him. He ran a hand through his hair. Fine, he gritted out, the word tasting like ash. I'll go with you. He pointed a finger at her, his blue eyes flashing with a fire that had nothing to do with chakra. But let's get one thing straight. I am not yours, and I am not your lover. We have a deal. I go with you, and these people, he gestured to the tribesmen, live. You leave them alone. Esdeath's smile was radiant. It was the smile of absolute victory. An excellent first negotiation, my dear Naruto. Very well. Your terms are accepted. She turned to her army. Leave them. Our prize is far more valuable. We return to the capital. Prepare my personal carriage for my guest. The soldiers, though confused by their general's sudden romantic fixation, obeyed without question. A path was cleared. Esdeath turned and began to walk back toward her lines, then paused and looked over her shoulder at him. Well, are you coming? She asked, a playful, possessive glint in her eyes. Naruto stood for a moment longer in the crater he had made, a monument to his power in this strange new world. He gave a final look at the endless, frozen wasteland, feeling the last, faint connection to his own world snap shut. He was adrift, a whirlpool of power in a frozen sea. For now, the only current was the one pulling him toward the woman in white. With a heavy heart and a mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions, Naruto Uzumaki walked out of the crater and followed his new, terrifying, and utterly obsessed captor toward the unknown fate that awaited him in the imperial capital. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Gilded Cage and the Shadows. The journey to the imperial capital was a study in contrasts. The carriage Esdeath provided was less a vehicle and more a miniature, mobile throne room. The interior was lined with plush velvet cushions the color of spilled wine, the woodwork was a dark, polished mahogany inlaid with silver, and a small, magically chilled box contained a selection of wine and cured meats, none of which Naruto touched. He sat opposite Esdeath, the silence between them thick and heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic clatter of the carriage wheels and the steady, disciplined tramp of the armored escort outside. Through the reinforced glass of the window, Naruto watched the world transform. The relentless, monochromatic white of the north slowly gave way to gray, rocky tundra, then to the hardy greens of a vast taiga. The air grew warmer, losing its razor-sharp edge. He saw small, impoverished villages, little more than clusters of wooden shacks, whose inhabitants would scatter and hide at the sight of the imperial banner leading their procession. Fear was the primary color of this land, more prevalent than the green of the trees or the brown of the earth. Esdeath watched him, not the scenery. Her piercing blue eyes tracked his every subtle movement, every flicker of expression. She held a glass of dark red wine, swirling it gently, her posture one of relaxed, absolute ownership. You are quiet, Naruto, she finally said, her voice a low murmur. Are you contemplating your new life? Imagining the luxuries that await you? I'm thinking about the people in those villages, he replied without looking at her, his gaze fixed on a thin woman. N pulling a ragged child behind a dilapidated hut. I'm thinking about why they look at your soldiers like they're monsters. Esdeath took a delicate sip of her wine. Because to them, we are. They are weak. They harbor rebels and fail to meet their tax levies. They drain the Empire's resources. My soldiers are merely the instrument of natural law, weeding the garden so that stronger things may grow. A garden doesn't grow if you just burn everything you don't like, Naruto countered, turning to face her. His gaze was level, unyielding. You have to nurture it. You protect it from blight, you give it water and sun. You don't call the sun a weakness. She smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of her lips. What an intriguing analogy. But the Empire is not a garden, and I am not a gardener. I am the winter that culls the herd. It is my purpose, and I perform it with glorious efficiency. You will see. The capital is the pinnacle of strength, the heart of the world, built on the bones of the weak who came before. He saw the fanaticism in her eyes, the unshakable conviction. Arguing with her was like trying to reason with a typhoon. It was a force of nature that believed entirely in its own right to exist and destroy. He fell silent again, conserving his energy. He needed to understand the world he was in before he could hope to change it. This conversation, as frustrating as it was a piece of the puzzle. The Empire was built on a philosophy of might makes right, and this woman was its high priestess. Days bled into one another. The landscape grew lusher, more civilized. They began to pass larger towns, paved roads, and disciplined patrols of Imperial soldiers who would snap to attention as Esdeath's carriage passed. The fear in the commoners' eyes was still there, but it was now mixed with a sullen, resentful obedience. Finally, they crested a large hill, and Naruto saw it. The Imperial capital. It was immense, a sprawling metropolis that filled a massive valley, encircled by a series of colossal, white stone walls. At its center, impossibly tall, was the Imperial Palace itself, a mountain of ornate towers, gilded roofs, and soaring arches that glittered under the midday sun. It was a testament to ambition and power, a city designed to awe and intimidate. But even from this distance, Naruto's sage-honed senses could feel the dissonance. The vibrant, powerful energy of the city's core was surrounded by a miasma of faint, suffering life force, a sea of quiet desperation lapping at the foundations of the great walls. As they passed through the main gates, the contrast became sickeningly real. The outer districts were a sprawling slum. Rotting tenements were crammed together, their inhabitants gaunt and dressed in rags. Open sewers ran along the cobblestone streets. The air was thick with the smell of poverty and despair. Imperial guards patrolled everywhere, their armor gleaming, their expressions bored and callous as they shoved aside anyone who didn't move out of their way fast enough. And then, as they moved further inward, crossing another set of walls, everything changed. The streets became wide and clean, paved with smooth flagstones. The buildings were grand, made of marble and pristine timber. Fountains played in open plazas. The people here were well fed, dressed in silks and fine fabrics, their laughter and chatter filling the air. It was a different world, separated from the squalor by nothing more than a stone barrier. Naruto's hands clenched into fists in his lap. He'd seen poverty in the land of waves, but this was different. This was systemic. This was a city intentionally designed to elevate the few by crushing the many. The decadence felt obscene. Behold, Naruto, Esdeath said, her voice filled with pride as she gestured to the splendor outside. The heart of the Empire. Your new home. He looked from the laughing, oblivious nobles to her triumphant face. This isn't strength, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. This is a disease. Her smile tightened for a fraction of a second before relaxing again. You have a unique perspective. I'm sure it will provide me with endless entertainment. The carriage Fina, LLY rolled to a stop before the main entrance of the palace. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. Servants in livery rushed out, bowing low. A contingent of guards in immaculate, crimson armor stood at attention. Esdeath stepped out of the carriage, the very air seeming to defer to her. She turned, offering a hand to Naruto. He ignored it, hopping down to the ground himself, his tattered orange and black clothing a stark, defiant splash of color against the palace's pristine white marble. He drew stares from everyone, a mixture of confusion, disdain, and fear. Come, Esdeath said, her good humor restored. Let me introduce you to my personal guard. They are the strongest Taigu users in the Empire, handpicked by me. My Jaegers. She led him through vast, echoing halls, their footsteps loud on the polished floors. The walls were hung with massive tapestries depicting imperial victories, scenes of slaughter and conquest rendered in glorious, heroic detail. Naruto felt a profound sense of wrongness, as if he were walking through the belly of some great, sleeping beast. They entered a vast, sun-drenched chamber with a high, vaulted ceiling. A large, circular table dominated the center of the room, around which several figures were gathered. They all stood as Esdeath entered. General, they said in near unison. At ease, Esdeath said, waving a dismissive hand. Her gaze swept over them, then landed on Naruto, a possessive hand resting on his shoulder. Everyone, I have returned. And I have brought a guest. This is Naruto Uzumaki. He will be staying with us for the foreseeable future. He is my fiancé. A stunned silence fell over the room. Naruto flinched as if struck. I am not your fiancé. Esdeath simply squeezed his shoulder, her grip like steel. Don't be difficult, dear. Now, allow me to introduce you. She pointed to a young man with dark, spiky hair and an earnest face, clad in armor that seemed a bit too big for him. This is Wave, a former sailor from the coast. An excellent fighter, if a bit naive. Wave looked at Naruto with wide, awestruck eyes. He could still feel the residual power from the reports that had filtered back from the north. It's an honor, sir. To stand up to the general like that, it's incredible. Naruto gave a slight, weary nod. At least this one seemed decent. This, Esdeath continued, gesturing to a small girl with black hair who was nibbling on a bag of cookies. A vacant look in her eyes, as Kurome. Don't let her size fool you. She is exceptionally dangerous. Kurome glanced at Naruto, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary before returning to her snacks. Naruto felt a strange pang. Her energy signature was bizarre, warped, and tinged with something that felt like death. But beneath it, he sensed a flicker of something familiar. A profound loneliness that reminded him, achingly, of himself as a child. Esdeath pointed to a large, hulking man in a strange mask and heavy uniform. Bowles, our specialist in incineration. A wonderful cook and a devoted family man, despite his profession. Bowles gave a small, nervous bow of his head. A pleasure to meet you. This flamboyant creature, she said, indicating a man with pristine white hair and a lab coat, who was looking at Naruto with an unsettling, analytical gleam, is Dr. Stylish. He has a passion for innovation and a flair for the dramatic. My, Dr. Stylish said, circling Naruto slowly. What a fascinating specimen. Such a perfectly symmetrical physique. And the energy you radiate, it's not like any Taigu I've ever documented. I simply must get a blood sample later. Naruto took an involuntary step back. Yeah, that's not happening. Finally, Esdeath's gesture fell upon a young woman with long brown hair, a bright, almost manic smile, and a mechanical dog sitting at her feet. The girl was dressed in a modified imperial uniform, her arms clearly cybernetic. Her eyes burned with a fervent, zealous light. And this is Seiryu Ubiquitous, Esdeath said. A former member of the capital garrison and a passionate believer in absolute justice. Seiryu snapped a sharp salute, her metal arm whirring. Sir, it is an honor to meet anyone the general deems worthy. I trust you are a stalwart ally in the fight to purge the ultimate evil that plagues our glorious empire. Her dog, a bizarre creature that was half organic, half machine, yipped in agreement. Its eyes glowing red, Naruto's sage-honed senses picked up on something deeply disturbing from her. Beneath the righteous fervor, her life energy was a chaotic storm of obsession and instability. Evil? Naruto asked, his voice neutral. What evil is that? Seiryu's smile widened, becoming terrifying. Why, all evil, thieves, murderers, traitors, rebels. Anyone who dares to defy the laws of the empire. They are a cancer that must be cut out with the unswerving sword of justice. She patted her dog. Koro and I have personally dispatched dozens of these villains. For justice. And who decides what's evil? Naruto pressed, his voice hardening slightly. The law decides, she proclaimed, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. The laws of the empire are absolute. To break them is to be evil. To be evil is to deserve death. It's a very simple, just system. Naruto thought of the starving villagers, the terrified commoners in the slums. What if the laws are wrong? What if they protect some people while letting others starve? Saryu's face contorted in confusion, then anger. Wrong. The Empire's laws cannot be wrong. That's traitorous thinking. To question the law is to be evil. Her mechanical arm whirred, and a small missile port opened at her wrist. Are you questioning justice, sir? The tension in the room skyrocketed. Wave looked horrified. Dr. Stylish looked intrigued. Esdeath watched with rapt attention, a curious smile on her face, eager to see how her new pet would handle this zealot. Naruto didn't flinch. He looked from Saryu's Furyu's face to the mindless weapon in her arm. Your justice is just a word you hide behind so you can hurt people without feeling guilty, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. It's hollow. And it's pathetic. Why you? Saryu shrieked, raising her arm. Enough, Saryu. Esdeath's voice cut through the air, sharp as a shard of ice. Saryu froze instantly, her conditioning overriding her rage. Naruto is my guest. You will not harm him. His unconventional views are for my entertainment alone. She turned to Naruto, her eyes glittering. You see, passion, conviction. It is what makes the Empire strong. Naruto just shook his head, a deep, profound disgust settling in his gut. This place was rotten to its very core. These weren't warriors. They were broken tools and fanatics, led by a monster who thought it was all a game. He needed to get out. To breathe. I need some air, he said, turning and walking towards the large balcony doors without waiting for permission. Esdeath let him go, a thoughtful expression on her face. Wave, she commanded. Accompany him. See that he doesn't get into any undue trouble. Wave, looking immensely relieved to be away from the confrontation, hurried after Naruto. Yes, General. The fresh air on the balcony did little to clear Naruto's head. The view was spectacular, a panoramic vista of the glittering, decadent inner city, but all he could see were the walls that kept the poor penned in like cattle. Wave stood awkwardly beside him. So, you really told Saryu off. Nobody does that. Someone should, Naruto muttered. She's not a soldier. She's a rabid dog with a badge. She just really believes in what she's doing, Wave offered weakly. She thinks she's making the world a better place. So did a lot of people I've had to fight, Naruto said. His voice distant. He leaned against the balustrade, the stone cold beneath his palms. He felt trapped, a canary in a gilded cage filled with predators. He had to get out, even for a little while. He needed to see the real city, the one he'd glimpsed on the way in. He needed to feel the pulse of the people, not the cold, dead heart of the palace. He glanced at Wave. The kid was earnest, his guard lowered. An opportunity. Hey, Wave, Naruto said, a bit of his old, charming grin making a rare appearance. I'm starving. The food in that carriage looked like it was made for statues. You know a good place to get some real food around here. Someplace with character. Wave brightened. Oh, yeah, there are some great places in the main commercial district. The food in the palace is always too fancy. I could show you a spot that has amazing grilled boar. Lead the way, Naruto said. It was a risk, but staying in the palace felt like a greater one. He needed to move. He needed a plan. And you couldn't make a plan without intelligence. A short while later, Naruto, now dressed in a simple tunic and pants Wave had procured for him, a vast improvement over his tattered shinobi gear, was walking through the bustling streets of the capital's inner city. Wave walked beside him, pointing out landmarks, while two of Esdeath's uniformed guards followed at a discreet distance. Naruto played the part of the curious tourist, but his senses were fully extended. He felt the flow of the crowd, the whispers of conversation, the clink of coin, the underlying current of fear and ambition that permeated everything. This city was alive, but it felt feverish, unhealthy. He needed to slip his leash. Hey, that place looks interesting, Naruto said, pointing to a crowded market stall selling trinkets. He and Wave moved towards it, the guards following. As they entered the thickest part of the crowd, Naruto formed a rapid, one-handed seal. A perfect substitution. In the blink of an eye, he had swapped places with a discarded crate behind the stall. The two guards, their attention on Wave, didn't notice a thing. Naruto, cloaked in the crowd's anonymity, was gone. He moved quickly, his shinobi training making him a ghost in the throng. He headed for the gate he'd seen earlier, the one that led to the outer districts. He slipped through with a merchant's cart, and in an instant, the world changed again. The noise, the color, the wealth, it all fell away, replaced by the grim reality of the slums. Here, the air was thick with the smell of coal smoke and unwashed bodies. People moved with a listless shuffle, their eyes downcast. The sounds were of coughing, quiet arguments, and the cries of hungry children. This was the truth of the empire Esdeath was so proud of. He walked for what felt like an hour, mapping the streets, observing the patterns of the guard patrols, listening. He needed a nexus, a place where information was traded, where the city's true pulse could be felt. And in a place like this, that usually meant one thing, a bar. He found it on a corner, a dingy-looking establishment with a faded sign that might have once read, "The Drunken Beast." The sound of rough laughter and music spilled out. It was more alive than anywhere else in this district. Perfect. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The place was smoky, crowded, and loud. It smelled of cheap ale and sweat. Rough-looking men and women sat at rickety tables, gambling, drinking, and arguing. Naruto ignored the curious stares his bright hair and healthy appearance drew and made his way to the bar. And that's when he saw her. She was sitting at a corner table, a massive mug of ale in one hand, laughing loudly at something her companion, a wiry old man, had said. She had a wild mane of blonde hair, golden eyes that seemed to glitter with mischief, and a presence that filled the entire room. She wore a revealing top and pants, and a belt with a lion's head buckle was slung low on her hips. She was radiating a vibrant, almost feral life energy that was like a bonfire in the dreary landscape of the slums. A huge, muscular brute of a man, clearly drunk, stumbled over to her table. "Well now, look what we have here. Buy a real man a drink, kitty cat." She looked him up and down, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her face. "Sorry, I don't drink with little boys. Run along before you get hurt." The man's face purpled with rage. "Little boy, I'll show you who's little." He slammed his massive fist on the table, intending to intimidate her. She didn't even flinch. "How about a little wager?" she said, her voice dropping to a purr. "Arm wrestling. If you win, I'll buy you drinks all night. If I win," she leaned forward, "you pay my tab and get lost." The man roared with laughter. "It's a deal. Easiest drinks I ever earned." The whole bar went quiet, turning to watch. The man planted his elbow on the table. She met his gaze, her grin widening, and placed her own elbow down. Their hands clasped. Naruto leaned against the bar, intrigued. He could sense the power coiled in her muscles. This was going to be interesting. "Ready," the brute grunted, already putting his weight into it. "Born ready," she purred. The match began. The man's arm, thick as a tree trunk, strained, veins popping on his forehead. He put everything he had into it. And her arm didn't move. It was like he was trying to push over a mountain. She just sat there, smiling, letting him tire himself out. "Having a little trouble there, big guy," she teased. With a final, desperate roar, he shoved with all his might. And with a flick of her wrist that seemed to require no effort at all, she slammed his hand down onto the table. The crack of the wood echoed through the silent bar. The man stared at his hand, then at her, his face a mask of shocked disbelief. The bar erupted in cheers and laughter. "Pay up," she said, tilting her head. The man, utterly humiliated, threw a handful of coins on the table and slunk out of the bar. She scooped up the coins, laughing, and took a long drink from her mug. Her golden eyes scanned the room, and they locked with Naruto's. He gave a small, appreciative nod. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the handsome stranger who hadn't been gawking like the others, but watching with a knowing calm. She beckoned him over with a crooked finger. Naruto pushed off the bar and walked over to her table. "That was impressive," he said, his voice genuinely admiring. "I get that a lot," she replied, gesturing to the empty seat. "You're new around here. I'd remember a face like yours. What's your name, Sunshine?" "Naruto." He sat down. "And you, Leone," she said, giving him a wink. "So, Naruto, what brings a guy who looks like he bellin'?" GS on the other side of the wall to a dive like this. Looking for a good drink and some honest conversation, he said. Seems like both are in short supply in this city. You ain't wrong about that, she laughed, a rich, throaty sound. So, you're a tourist. Or are you running from something? Her eyes were sharp, analytical beneath the playful exterior. A little of both, he admitted. I'm a guest of the Empire, you could say. A very insistent host. Leone's playful demeanor sharpened. A guest, in the palace. Her gaze flickered down, noticing the fine quality of his borrowed clothes. Quote, you're either very important or very stupid to be wandering around here alone. Let's go with important, Naruto said with a half smile. I like to see things for myself. I don't trust gilded cages. Her grin returned, wider this time. She liked him. He had guts. And something else. A deep well of power she could feel but not identify. It wasn't a taigu, but it was potent. A man after my own heart. Well, Naruto, if you're looking for the truth of this city, you've come to the right place. But it'll cost you. She pushed her empty mug forward. Naruto signaled the bartender. A round for my new friend, Leone. They talked for over an hour. Or rather, Leone talked, and Naruto listened. She told him stories of the capital, of the corrupt ministers, the brutal guards, the forgotten people. It was all told with a cynical, street-smart humor, but underneath it, Naruto could feel a burning, righteous anger. She was more than just a charismatic brawler. She was a voice for the voiceless. He, in turn, remained vague about his origins, framing himself as a traveler from a distant land with a unique skill set, now caught in the orbit of General Esdeath. At the mention of Esdeath's name, Leone's eyes hardened for a moment. Playing with the Empire's mad dog, huh? You've got a death wish, sunshine. She seems to think I'm her new chew toy, Naruto said dryly. Then you'd better have sharp teeth, Leone advised. Her voice serious. She leaned in closer, her tone dropping. Listen, Naruto. This city, it's a predator. It'll eat you alive if you let it. You seem like a good guy, but good guys don't last long here. You need to pick a side. I'm beginning to see that, he said. His gaze met hers, a silent understanding passing between them. They were on opposite sides of a conflict he was just beginning to comprehend. But they were cut from the same cloth. He knew he should get back before his absence caused a major incident, but he felt more at home in this grimy bar with this fierce, lion-hearted woman than he had at any point since arriving in this world. I'll see you again, Leone, he said, standing up. I'm counting on it, sunshine, she purred, giving him a final, lingering look. Try not to get yourself killed before then. Naruto slipped out of the bar and back into the labyrinthine streets of the slums. He made his way back to the inner city, his mind racing. He had a contact now. A friendly face in the shadows. It wasn't a plan, but it was a start. He used another substitution to reappear near a startled Wave, who had been frantically searching for him. There you are, Wave cried, half relieved, half exasperated. Where did you go? The guards and I have been looking everywhere. Sorry, Naruto said, not sounding sorry at all. Got turned around. This city is huge. He knew Esdeath would be furious. He didn't care. The small act of defiance, of reclaiming a piece of his own agency, felt like a victory. His prediction was correct. When they returned to the palace, Esdeath was waiting. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't ordering punishments. She was standing in the middle of her chambers, arms crossed, with an expression of cold, quiet fury that was far more terrifying. You left, she stated, her voice dangerously calm. I went for a walk, Naruto replied, meeting her glare without flinching. You eluded my guards. You went into the slums. Do you take me for a fool? I take you for someone who wanted to keep me in a cage, he shot back. I don't do well in cages. The temperature in the room dropped. A thin layer of frost began to creep across the windows. You are mine, Naruto. Your freedom is a gift I bestow, not a right you can take. Perhaps you require a more physical reminder of your position. Before Naruto could respond, a frantic soldier burst into the room. Falling to one knee, General Esdeath, urgent news. Night Raid is attacking the minister's western convoy. They've hit the decoy, and their main force is now engaging the primary transport. Esdeath's anger vanished in an instant, replaced by a familiar, ecstatic battle lust. Excellent. A chance for some real sport. She looked at Naruto, a predatory gleam in her eyes. It seems our discussion will have to wait. You, however, are coming with me. I want to see what you do when faced with the Empire's truest enemies. And this time, she added, her voice dropping to a whisper. I'll be holding the leash myself. A short while later, Naruto found himself on a street in the capital's wealthy merchant district. The sounds of battle echoed from a few blocks away. The area had been cleared of civilians. But the signs of a struggle were everywhere: overturned carts, shattered windows. Esdeath stood beside him, her rapier in hand, her Jaegers fanning out to secure the perimeter. They are bold, attacking in broad daylight, Esdeath mused. Najanda is getting desperate. Naruto was in sage mode, his senses spread wide. He could feel them, 6 powerful life signatures, moving with lethal precision. They were fighting Imperial guards, cutting them down with terrifying efficiency. But he also felt the dozens of smaller, terrified signatures. Civilians, cowering in their homes, in alleyways, trapped by the sudden violence. The fighting spilled onto their street. A large, armored man with a familiar polearm, bullet, if the whispers Naruto had overheard were correct, sent a squad of soldiers flying. A pink-haired girl with a massive rifle, Pumpkin, fired a devastating blast of energy that blew a carriage apart. Then, he felt it. A presence, silent as a falling leaf, fast as a striking cobra. It was moving along the rooftops, a whisper of death, heading directly for them. She's here, Naruto said, his eyes fixed on the roof of a nearby building. Who? Esdeath asked, her smile widening. As if in answer, a figure dropped from the sky. A girl in a black, sleeveless uniform, with long black hair and blood-red eyes. In her hands, she held a katana that radiated a chilling, malevolent aura. Akame, the one-cut killer of Night Raid. She landed in a crouch, her movements utterly silent, her gaze locked on Esdeath. Esdeath, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Your life ends here, Akame. Esdeath purred. You're as grim as ever. You truly believe you can kill me? Before their fight could begin, chaos erupted. Another blast from Pumpkin's cannon forced them all to scatter. In the confusion, Naruto moved, not towards the combatants, but away from them, his instincts screaming. His goal was not to join this fight. It was to contain it. He found himself in a small plaza, temporarily shielded from the main battle. And then, he was not alone. Akame appeared before him as if from thin air, Murasama held at the ready. Her red eyes were cold, assessing. She saw him as an unknown. A powerful variable standing next to Esdeath. In her world, that made him a target. You were with Esdeath, she stated. It wasn't a question. Not by choice, Naruto answered, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. I don't want to fight you. Everyone we fight says that, she replied, and lunged. Her speed was incredible. She closed the distance in a blink. Her blade a silver blur aimed directly at his heart. One scratch from Murasama, and its poison curse would mean instant death. Naruto moved. He didn't have to outrun the blade, just its edge. He swayed to the side. The tip of the katana whispering past his chest, close enough to tear the fabric of his tunic. He didn't counterattack. He simply created distance, his movements fluid and reactive. Akame pressed the attack, her expression unchanging. Her swordsmanship was flawless, a torrent of lethal strikes from every conceivable angle. Each thrust, each slash, was aimed at a vital point. It was the most efficient, deadly fighting style Naruto had ever seen. But he was faster. He weaved through her storm of steel, a leaf in the wind. He parried a thrust with the back of his forearm, the force of her blow immense. But he dispersed it. He ducked under a horizontal slash, the wind from the blade stirring his hair. He saw every attack before it was launched, his sage mode predicting the flow of her energy. The tensing of her muscles. To Akame, it was maddening. She had never faced an opponent like this. He wasn't blocking, not really. He was simply, not there. He moved with an impossible grace, never giving her a solid target, his blue eyes holding not malice, but a focused, analytical calm. It felt less like a fight and more like she was trying to cut water. She feinted a low sweep and then reversed her grip, thrusting the blade upward in a move designed to catch an opponent off guard as they leapt. Naruto didn't leap. He dropped, his hand catching her wrist. The contact sent a jolt through both of them. His grip was firm, unyielding, but not crushing. Her eyes widened in shock. In all her battles, no one had ever been fast enough, or foolish enough, to just grab her. He held her gaze. "Stop this," he said, his voice firm. "Innocent people are going to get hurt." For a split second, she hesitated. His eyes, they weren't like the eyes of the other monsters she fought. There was no bloodlust, no cruelty. Only a strange, compelling certainty. It was a fatal hesitation in any other fight. But not this one. Using her momentary pause, Naruto twisted his hand. It wasn't a violent, bone-breaking motion. It was a precise, technical disarm, applying pressure to the joint and nerve. Her fingers, trained to hold her sword through any pain, went numb against her will. Murasama, the legendary one-cut killer blade, slipped from her grasp. It clattered onto the cobblestones between them, the sound deafening in the sudden silence of their personal battle. Akame stared at her empty hand, then at the sword on the ground, then back at Naruto. Her mind, usually a cold, calculating machine in combat, was blank with shock. He could have done anything in that moment. A killing blow, a disabling strike. He had her completely at his mercy. And all he did was disarm her. The moment was shattered by a tremendous crash from the adjacent street. A wall exploded outwards, and Bullet was sent flying, his armor sparking where Esdeath's ice had struck it. Night Raid's attack was failing. "Akame, we have to retreat," he yelled, recovering. Akame broke from her trance, her training kicking in. She kicked Murasama back into her hand, scooped it up, and fell back, her eyes never leaving Naruto. The look in them was no longer cold and empty. It was filled with a dawning, terrifying confusion. Who was he? The members of Night Raid vanished back into the urban jungle as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind chaos and destruction. Esdeath, laughing in exhilaration from her victory, walked into the plaza. Her gaze falling on Naruto. "You had her," Esdeath said, a hint of disappointment in her voice. "Akame of the Demon's Sword Murasama. You had her disarmed and you let her go." "My goal wasn't to kill her," Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over the plaza. And then he saw them. Cowering behind the shattered remains of a fruit stall was a small family. A father, a mother, and a little girl no older than 6. Clutching a dirty doll, they were paralyzed with terror, staring at the aftermath of the battle. Above them, a huge section of a marble facade, dislodged by one of Pumpkin's blasts, groaned and began to break loose from the building. Esdeath didn't even notice them. Her focus was on the thrill of the fight, the lingering presence of her enemies. Naruto acted without thinking. There was no time for a jutsu. No time to run. He raised his hand. From behind him, a sphere of pure, absolute blackness materialized in an instant. It shot forward, silent and swift, and hovered directly above the family. The massive chunk of stone, weighing several tons, fell. It impacted the truth-seeking orb with a dull thud and simply stopped. It hung there, its immense weight completely negated, held aloft by the small, black sphere. Naruto stood there, his back to Esdeath, his arm outstretched towards the family he had just saved. He slowly turned his head, and the look in his eyes made Esdeath's breath catch. The casual annoyance, the weary frustration, it was all gone. His blue eyes had shifted, the pupils becoming slitted and feral, glowing with a faint, golden light. It was the gaze of the 9 tails, tempered by the wisdom of a sage. It was a look of cold, absolute fury. A fury born not of personal insult, but of righteous indignation. His glare was not directed at Esdeath. It swept past her, towards the direction Night Raid had fled, and then back to the Imperial soldiers beginning to swarm the area, their faces callous and uncaring of the civilian plight. He was looking at them all. At the entire conflict, at the careless destruction, and finding them all wanting. "Both of you," he whispered, his voice a low growl that carried an impossible weight. "The Empire, Night Raid, you're all the same. You tear this world apart for your own reasons and you don't even see who you crush beneath your feet." He lowered his hand. The truth-seeking orb vanished, and the chunk of masonry fell the final few inches to the ground with a harmless thud, its momentum gone. The family stared at him, their terror slowly turning to awe. Naruto took a step forward, away from Esdeath. placing himself symbolically between her and the family. He was no longer a captive or a guest. He was a new, independent power on the board. And he was furious. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The third option. The fury in Naruto's eyes was not the explosive, wild anger of his youth. It was a cold, compressed rage, the kind that builds in the heart of a star just before it goes supernova. It was the anger of a man who had fought a war to end all wars, only to be thrown into a new one just as senseless as the last. Esdeath felt it, not as an insult, but as a change in the atmospheric pressure. The air grew heavy, charged with a power that had nothing to do with her ice. It was the raw, untamed energy of a being who had touched divinity and was utterly unimpressed by the petty squabbles of mortals. She saw the slitted pupils, the faint golden glow, and for the first time, a genuine, thrilling shiver of something akin to fear traced its way down her spine. It was delicious. This wasn't a show. Naruto's voice was a low growl, each word honed to a razor's edge. He was still looking at the cowering family, but his words were for her, for the memory of Night Raid, for the entire, broken world. This was a consequence. Your game has rules now. He took a step toward the family. The father flinched, pulling his wife and daughter closer. Naruto knelt, his movements slow, deliberate. His furious gaze softened instantly into one of profound gentleness. The shift was so jarring it was like watching the sun rise in the middle of a hurricane. "It's okay," he said, his voice now warm and reassuring. "You're safe." He reached into a small pouch on his belt, one he'd been given with his new clothes, and pulled out a simple rice ball Wave had insisted he take. He offered it to the little girl. She stared at him, then at the food, her large, frightened eyes slowly filling with a desperate hunger. Hesitantly, she reached out her tiny, grimy hand and took it. Her parents watched, tears welling in their eyes. Naruto stood, turning his back on them to face Esdeath. The gentleness vanished, replaced once more by a granite-hard resolve. He jerked his head toward her soldiers, who were now beginning to herd civilians with callous indifference. "Get them out of here. All of them. Find them shelter. Give them food. Now." It was not a request. It was a command. The captain of the guard scoffed. "We don't take orders from." "Do it." Esdeath's voice was sharp as cracking ice. The captain froze, his eyes wide. She was looking at Naruto, her lips curled into a slow, fascinated smile. This defiance, this commanding presence in the face of her authority, it was more intoxicating than any battle. He wasn't just a powerful beast to be tamed, he was a king asserting his domain. "Do as he says. See to the civilians. Our sport is concluded for the day." The soldiers, utterly bewildered, scrambled to obey their general's bizarre order. The walk back to the palace was silent. Naruto walked with a purpose he hadn't had before, his strides long and confident. He was no longer a captive being led. He was a force moving to its next destination. Esdeath walked beside him, content to observe, to feel the powerful hum of his contained anger. It was like walking next to a controlled thunderstorm. Back in her lavish chambers, the tension finally broke. She dismissed her guards, leaving the two of them alone. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, bathing everything in a blood-orange light. "That was a magnificent display, Naruto," Esdeath began, pouring herself a glass of wine. "To command such unique power, to protect the weak with it, you are a paradox. A truly fascinating one. I'm not a puzzle for you to solve," Naruto said, turning to face her. He stood in the center of the room, a pillar of defiance amidst her opulent spoils of war. "And I'm not your fiancé, your guest, or your pet. I'm done playing by your rules." She raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip. "Oh, and whose rules will you be playing by?" "Night Raid's. Do you truly think those self-righteous assassins have the answer?" "No," he said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. Quote, "They're just the other side of the same worthless coin. One side slaughters in the name of order, the other in the name of revolution. Both leave a trail of bodies. Both are drenched in the blood of people who just wanted to live their lives in peace." He took a step closer, his blue eyes boring into hers. "I'm not joining you. I'm not joining them. I'm making a third option. From now on, I protect the people of this city. All of them. The ones in the slums you ignore and the ones in the villas you use as pawns. Anyone, Imperial Guard, corrupt noble, or self-proclaimed revolutionary, who brings them harm will have to go through me. Esdeath stared at him, the wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Then, she threw her head back and laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated delight. Glorious, she exclaimed, her eyes shining with a feverish light. Absolutely glorious. You're not just defying me, you're declaring war on everyone. On the very structure of our world. How wonderfully arrogant, how utterly suicidal. She set her glass down with a sharp click. And how do you plan to enact this grand declaration? A lone man against an empire and a revolution. You'll be torn to pieces before sunrise. Naruto just smiled. It was a tired, grim smile, but it held the confidence of a man who had faced down armies before. I'm not a lone man. He brought his hands together in the cross-shaped seal that was as much a part of him as his own name. Shadow Clone Jutsu. The room was instantly filled with a series of soft pops and clouds of white smoke. When it cleared, Naruto was no longer alone. He was surrounded by 100 identical copies of himself. They filled every available space in Esdeath's massive chamber, standing perfectly still, their expressions identical to the originals. Esdeath's smile faltered, her eyes widening in genuine shock. She could feel them. Each one had a physical presence, a chakra signature. They were not illusions. They were solid. What is this sorcery? This is how, the original Naruto said, his voice echoed by his 100 clones in perfect, chilling unison. The game has changed, General. Try to keep up. And with that, 99 of the clones dissolved the walls of the palace and leapt from the windows and balconies, vanishing into the twilight-draped city below. The original Naruto stood his ground, along with a single clone. Leaving Esdeath alone in her chamber, staring out at the impossible exodus, her mind racing to process what she had just witnessed. The capital woke the next day to a miracle. In the merchant district where the battle had taken place, the residents emerged from their homes to find the streets being cleared. Not by the surly, slow-moving Imperial sanitation crews, but by dozens of identical men with bright golden hair and tireless energy. They moved with unnatural speed and coordination, lifting heavy debris as if it were cardboard, repairing shattered storefronts with practiced ease. Their movements a blur of orange and black. In the slums, the change was even more profound. A notorious warehouse, known to belong to one of Minister Honest's most corrupt cron. Wise, a man who hoarded grain while the people starved, had been emptied overnight. Not a single guard was harmed, not a single lock was broken. The doors had simply been opened, and the contents, liberated. Now, that same grain, along with fresh vegetables and meat from a source no one could identify, was being distributed in the slum's main square. Dozens more of the golden ghosts, as they were already being called, managed the lines. Their smiles warm, their demeanor patient. They handed out food, offered water from barrels they'd filled with clean water from the inner city's aqueducts, and spoke with a kindness the people of the slums hadn't heard in generations. And when a squad of Imperial guards, accustomed to shaking down the locals for a share of whatever they had, tried to interfere, they were met by a new kind of resistance. This food is for the people, a Naruto clone said, stepping between the guards and a woman clutching a sack of flour. Find a meal elsewhere. The guard captain, a burly man with a scar on his cheek, sneered. And who are you to tell us what to do? You some kind of charity? Get out of our way before we arrest you for inciting a riot. He shoved the clone. It was like shoving a stone wall. The clone didn't budge. I won't tell you again, the clone said, his smile gone, his voice dropping a full octave. That's it. You're under arrest. The captain drew his sword. The clone sighed. It moved in a blur. One moment the captain was drawing his sword, the next he was on his back, the wind knocked out of him, his sword lying 10 feet away. The other guards, seeing their leader taken down in less than a second without even a real blow being struck, hesitated. The dozens of other Narutos in the square all stopped what they were doing and turned to look at them. Their expressions identical and unnerving. The guards, faced with a small, silent army, wisely decided to retreat. By midday, the entire capital was buzzing. The nobles and wealthy merchants were in an uproar, demanding to know who was behind this blatant defiance of imperial authority. The common people, however, spoke in hushed, hopeful whispers. They called them the Uzumaki Guard, the helpers. The ghosts who brought food and hope. Children would follow them through the streets, and the clones would often stop, create another clone to play a game of tag with them, and then disperse, leaving behind a laughing child and astonished parents. In his opulent office, drowning in paperwork and hedonistic excess, Minister Honest was not pleased. An army of identical men. He sneered. His corpulent form slumped in his massive chair. Giving away my assets, undermining imperial authority, and Esdeath just allows this. General Budo stood before him, ramrod straight, his expression like chiseled granite. He wore his full armor, as always, his immense taigu, a Dramalek, crackling with latent lightning. The reports are clear, Minister. The man, Uzumaki, is Esdeath's new obsession. She has declared him her fiancé and keeps him at the palace. These copies appear to be a result of his taigu. I don't care if he's the Emperor's long-lost son. Honest slammed a fleshy fist on his desk, jiggling his chins. He is making the people hopeful. A hopeful populace is a rebellious populace. He is disrupting the delicate balance of fear and dependency that keeps this city in line. He is a threat to our, control. He is a foreign element of immense and unknown power operating within the capital, Budo stated, his voice a low rumble. He has already demonstrated the ability to defeat Imperial soldiers and elude General Esdeath's own guards. His actions are a direct insult to the Empire's sovereignty. He must be eliminated. No, not eliminated, Honest said, a cunning gleam in his piggish eyes. Not yet. We can't afford to anger Esdeath. She is unstable enough as it is. But this third option of his cannot be allowed to stand. We must discredit him, turn the people against him, frame him for some atrocity. A dead hero is a martyr. A disgraced one is forgotten. Budo's lip curled in distaste. He was a warrior, a man of honor and law. The minister's schemes were beneath him. I do not deal in schemes, Minister. I am the great general. My purpose is to defend the Empire from its enemies. This Uzumaki has declared himself an enemy to our order. I will challenge him. I will face him in honorable combat and crush him. I will remind this city where true power lies. Honest chuckled. Patience, Budo. Your fist is a powerful tool, but a clumsy one. Let me try my way first. But if it comes to it, you will have your chance to break him. Budo said nothing. He simply turned and left, the air crackling in his wake. He did not trust the minister's plans, but he agreed with the conclusion. Naruto Uzumaki's presence was a cancer, and it needed to be cut out. On a rooftop overlooking the chaotic but hopeful energy of the slums, the real Naruto sat cross-legged, his eyes closed. He was the nexus, the command center for the 100 minds he had spread across the city. Information flowed into him, the layout of the streets, the locations of guard patrols, the whispers of the people. The taste of the cheap soup an old woman had offered one of his clones. He was learning the city, not as a map, but as a living, breathing entity. A soft thud landed on the roof behind him. He didn't open his eyes. You're making one hell of a mess, Sunshine, a familiar, husky voice purred. I thought I was cleaning one up, he replied, finally opening his eyes and turning to see Leone perched on the edge of the roof, a wide, impressed grin on her face. She sauntered over, her hips swaying, and plopped down next to him. Tomato, an army of golden haw. I read pretty boys running around handing out stolen food and spanking the city guard. You don't do things by halves, do you? It's the only way I know, he admitted, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time that day. It felt good to see her. How do you find me? Please, she scoffed, playfully nudging his shoulder. I'm a professional. Finding the one stationary blondie in a city full of his running around twins wasn't exactly a challenge. Besides, she tapped the side of her nose, I have my sources. The whole underworld is talking about you. They don't know whether to be scared of you or apply for a job. Tell them I'm not hiring, he said with a chuckle. So, you approve. Leone's playful expression sobered slightly. She looked down at the square below, where one of his CL.1s was lifting a small child onto his shoulders so he could see over the crowd. Approve. Naruto, what you're doing. Night Raid has been fighting for years, assassinating scumbags, trying to spark a revolution. And in one day, You've given these people more hope than we've managed in a decade. She turned to him, her golden eyes serious. You've also painted a massive target on your back. The minister wants you gone. The nobles want your head. And my boss, she sighed, wants to know what the hell your game is. I told you my game, he said, his gaze steady. I protect them. He nodded toward the people below. It's a good game, Leone admitted. But you can't win it alone. You have the power, but you don't know the players. You stole grain from Ogre's warehouse. Good choice, he's a top-tier bastard. But did you know he's also the primary funder for the Western garrison? You didn't just take his food, you crippled their operational budget for the month. They'll be gunning for you. And they're better equipped than the City Watch. Naruto listened, absorbing the information. She was right. He had power, but he was blind. So be my eyes, Leone. The offer hung in the air between them. It wasn't a request to join him. It was a proposal for a partnership. Leone's grin returned, slow and predatory. Now that's an interesting proposition. What's in it for me? A city where people don't have to live in fear. He said simply. And my eternal gratitude. And maybe I'll teach you how to arm wrestle two guys at once. She laughed, a loud, genuine bark of a laugh that made him smile. You drive a hard bargain, sunshine. All right, you've got a deal. I'll be your guide to this cesspool. I'll point you to the real monsters, the ones hiding behind fancy titles. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But you owe me, and I always collect. Their moment of burgeoning partnership was interrupted by a sudden jolt that went through Naruto. He grunted, his eyes losing focus for a second. Whoa, you okay? Leone asked, her hand instinctively going to his arm. Yeah, fine, he said, his brow furrowed. A clone just dispersed. It wasn't an injury, it was information, a memory, sharp and cold, flooding his mind. He saw it through his clone's eyes, a dark, fetid alley deep in the poorest sector of the slums. The clone had been patrolling, checking for trouble. It had found a body, slumped against a brick wall. But this wasn't a common stabbing or a beating. The victim, a young man, had no visible wounds. His clothes were intact, but his face was a mask of silent terror. And his arm was crumbling into fine, gray dust that blew away on the faint breeze. There was no blood, no gore, just erasure. But it was the feeling that chilled Naruto to the core. A residual energy signature lingered in the alley. It was faint, but it was utterly alien. It was the same sterile, cosmic coldness he had felt from the dimensional fissure that had brought him here. It was the energy of something that did not belong. This wasn't a murder. It was a deletion. A message. Naruto. Leone's voice pulled him back. She saw the grim look on his face. What did you see? Trouble, he said, his voice distant. A different kind of trouble. Before he could explain, another presence made itself known. A flicker of movement in the shadows of a building across the street. It was faint, almost perfectly suppressed, but his sage mode picked it up. A single life signature, watching them. Leone felt it too, her instincts screaming. We've got a tail. Naruto's gaze locked onto the shadow. Don't worry, he said softly. I know who it is. In the darkness of a dilapidated room across the way, Akame stood as still as a statue, her hand resting on the hilt of Murasama. Naginata had given her the order, observe the anomaly. Determine his threat level, and if necessary, eliminate him. She had been watching for hours. She had seen him on the rooftop, the center of this impossible web. She had seen him talking with the blonde woman from Night Raid's own informant network, Leone. And she had seen him hand out food. She had watched one of his copies sit with a group of street orphans, creating a small, warm ball of light in his hand to entertain them. She saw the children's laughter, their awe. She saw the clone create another copy to fix a broken cart for an old merchant, refusing any payment. It made no sense. Strength, in her world, was a tool for killing. It was the means by which you completed missions, eliminated targets, and survived. It was cold, efficient, and final. But this man, he wielded a strength that dwarfed anyone she had ever known, a power that could level cities, and he used it to help, to build, to nurture. She had come here to assess a target. But the longer she watched, the more she felt like she was the one being assessed, her entire life's philosophy held up and found wanting. He could have killed her in that plaza. He had held her life in his hands and had chosen not to take it. Why? Her mission was to kill him if he was a threat. But was he? He was a threat to the Empire, certainly. But he was doing more to undermine the minister in one day than Night Raid had in years, and he was doing it without killing anyone. Her internal conflict was a silent, raging storm. Her training, her past, her loyal tie to the boss, it all screamed at her to draw her blade and end him. But the image of him kneeling to give a rice ball to a child, the memory of his eyes holding no malice as he disarmed her, they held her back. For the first time in her life as an assassin, Akame hesitated. She lowered her hand from her sword, faded back into the shadows, and was gone. Her mission was unfulfilled. She had a report to make. And she had no idea what she was going to say. Back at the palace, the setting sun was no comfort. Esdeath stood on her balcony, a glass of untouched wine in her hand, watching the last of Naruto's clones disperse across the city as night fell. Her Jaegers stood behind her, a tangible tension in the air. "General," Waves said, his voice hesitant. "The reports are overwhelming. He's won the hearts of the entire lower city. They're calling him a hero. He is making a mockery of us," Saryu snarled, her cybernetic dog growling in agreement. "His actions spit on the law. He must be punished for his justice." Esdeath was silent for a long moment. She was not angry about the people. The opinions of the weak were less than meaningless to her. She was enraged by the defiance. He had been offered a place at her side, the ultimate position of power, and he had chosen to go play with peasants in the dirt. He was rejecting her, and yet, it was thrilling. He hadn't run, he hadn't hidden, he had thrown down a gauntlet to the entire world and was backing it up with a power she still couldn't comprehend. "He is not a hero," Esdeath said finally, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "He is a force, and forces cannot be punished or discredited. They must be met." She turned, a predatory fire in her eyes. "He wants to prove his philosophy is superior. Very well, he will prove it against me." When Naruto returned to the palace, having slipped past the guards with ease, he found her waiting for him in the palace's grand training yard. The moon was high, casting the field in a pale, silvery light. She stood alone in the center, not in her general's uniform, but in a simple, dark training outfit that did nothing to hide the athletic power of her form. Her rapier was discarded to the side. "I grow tired of our philosophical debates, Naruto," she said as he approached. "Words are meaningless. Show me in combat how your way is superior. No Taigu, no Rasenshuriken, just you and me, hand to hand. Let's see whose will is stronger." Naruto looked at her. He was tired. The mental strain of controlling 100 clones, the chilling discovery in the alley, the complex dance of alliances and observations, it was all weighing on him. But he saw the challenge in her eyes, the desperate need to connect in the only way she knew how. And he knew that to refuse was to lose the ground he had just gained. "Fine," he said, shrugging off his borrowed tunic, leaving him in his black shirt and pants. "But if I win, you listen. Really listen to what I have to say. If you win," she said, a hungry smile gracing her lips as she dropped into a low, predatory stance. "Come, then, tame me." The fight was nothing like their first encounter. There were no cataclysmic explosions, no city-shaking techniques. This was intimate, brutal, and breathtakingly fast. Esdeath was a whirlwind of precision and savagery. Every strike, a knife hand, an elbow, a devastatingly fast kick, was aimed to maim or cripple. Her style was pure, efficient offense, born of a lifetime of slaughter. Naruto's was the opposite. It was a dance of absolute defense. He flowed around her, his frog Kata turning her own momentum against her. He didn't block her strikes. He redirected them, the natural energy surrounding him acting as an extension of his own limbs. He'd parry a killing blow to her throat with 2 fingers, sending the force harmlessly into the air. He'd pivot away from a crippling kick to his knee, his hand guiding her leg just enough to make her overextend. It was a battle of philosophies in motion. Her desire to destroy versus his will to preserve. The unstoppable force against the immovable object. She was faster than almost anyone he had ever fought. But he had the sage's perception. He saw her attacks as she conceived them. Frustration began to build in her. She was throwing everything she had at him, and she couldn't land a single solid blow. Fight back, she snarled, lunging with a furious combination of strikes. This is the fight, he replied calmly, weaving through the storm of her limbs. I'm showing you. There's another way besides destruction. Finally, she saw an opening. She feinted a high kick and dropped into a sweep, aiming to take his legs out from under him. It was a perfect maneuver. But he was expecting it. As she dropped, so did he. He didn't jump over the sweep. He moved with it, his hand shooting out and locking onto her ankle, while his other arm wrapped around her waist. In one fluid, startlingly intimate motion, he used her own momentum to lift her, spin her, and bring her down onto her back, his body pinning her to the cold ground. He had her. One arm was trapped beneath his knee. Her other was held in an iron grip. His weight was pressing down on her, leaving her utterly immobilized. She struggled, her immense physical strength useless against his perfect leverage. He was looking down at her, his face just inches from hers. His golden hair fell around them, and his blue eyes held no triumph, only a quiet intensity. He wasn't even breathing hard. It's over, he said, his voice soft. Esdeath froze, pinned, defeated. For the first time in her memory, she was completely at someone else's mercy. Her heart was hammering in her chest, a wild, frantic rhythm. She expected a finishing blow, a sneer, a declaration of victory. Instead, he just held her there, his gaze unwavering. This is strength, Esdeath, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Control, knowing when to stop, knowing that you don't have to break something to prove you're stronger than it. She stared up at him, at the man who had defeated her without leaving a single bruise. The man who wielded godlike power to give bread to children. The man who had her at his complete mercy and chose only to speak. The raw, undeniable dominance of the position, combined with the shocking lack of cruelty, sent a dizzying, contradictory thrill through her. It was infuriating. It was humiliating. It was the most intensely attractive thing anyone had ever done to her. He had won. And now, she had to listen. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Warrior's Heart. The training yard was silent save for the sound of their breathing. The cool night air did little to quell the heat radiating from where their bodies were pressed together. Naruto held Esdeath pinned, not with brute force, but with a perfect application of leverage and balance. He could feel the furious, frustrated strength coiling in her muscles, a caged tiger fighting against the bars of his technique. Get off me, she hissed. The words a mixture of command and barely concealed vulnerability. To be so utterly dominated, so completely outmaneuvered, was a new and deeply unsettling sensation. Naruto didn't move. He continued to hold her gaze, his blue eyes searching hers. Not until you understand, he said, his voice quiet but firm. This is what I've been trying to tell you. I beat you. I didn't have to hurt you to do it. Strength isn't just about destruction. He could feel the war raging within her. Her pride, a monument forged in the blood of millions, was screaming at her to fight, to tear him apart. But the undeniable reality of her position, the sheer skill that had put her there, was a truth she couldn't ignore. He hadn't overpowered her. He had outthought her, outmoved her, outphilosophized her in the raw language of combat. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension in her body eased. It wasn't surrender, but a grudging, resentful acceptance of the moment. A silent acknowledgement of his victory. Seeing the shift, Naruto released her and stood up in one fluid motion. He offered her a hand. She stared at it for a long second, her pride still stinging. Then, with a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, she ignored it and rose to her feet on her own, brushing invisible dust from her training clothes. You have proven your point, she said, her voice tight. Your style is efficient. It was the closest she could come to a compliment. You won the duel. As per our agreement, I will listen. She didn't sound happy about it, but the promise was there, a crack in the icy fortress of her ideology. Naruto knew it was a start. Pushing harder now would only make her retreat. Good, he said, giving her a small nod. He turned and walked towards the palace entrance, his back to her. Tomorrow, we're going for a walk. A real one. No guards. Just you and me. Esdeath watched him go, a complex storm of emotions swirling within her. Humiliation, anger, grudging respect, and a burning, obsessive curiosity. He had defeated her, him, the strange, golden-haired man from another world. And instead of claiming a prize or gloating, he had simply asked her to take a walk. He continued to be the most infuriating, unpredictable, and captivating creature she had ever encountered. The next day found Naruto wandering through the palace's enormous kitchens. The place was a hive of activity. Chefs and servants rushing about preparing elaborate meals for the palace's elite. Naruto, however, ignored the roasting swans and mountains of pastries. He was looking for something specific. His clones had spent the night not just distributing aid, but also gathering information. He was building a comprehensive map of the palace's inner workings, its supply lines, its routines. And he had learned something interesting. He found her in a small, out-of-the-way pantry, hidden from the main chaos of the kitchen. Kurone sat alone on a crate, surrounded by half-empty bags of cookies and sweets. Methodically working her way through another one. She looked up as he entered, her dark eyes wide and guarded, her hand instinctively inching towards the hilt of her sheathed katana. Naruto paid her no mind. He began rummaging through the shelves, his movements casual. Looking for the good stuff, he said to the room at large. They hide the best snacks from the generals, you know. Afraid it'll make them soft. Kurone watched him, her chewing slowing. She didn't respond, her expression remaining blank, but her focus was entirely on him. Ah, here we go, Naruto said, pulling a small clay pot sealed with wax from a high shelf. He broke the seal and took a sniff. The rich, savory aroma of preserved fish filled the small room. He then grabbed a loaf of freshly baked bread. He sat down on a crate opposite her, broke off a piece of bread, and topped it with a piece of the fish. He took a bite, closing his eyes with an appreciative hum. Want some? He asked, holding out the pot and the loaf. Kurone stared at the offering, then at his face. Her mind, a labyrinth of paranoia and training, was trying to find the angle. Was it poisoned? Was it a trick? But his expression was open, friendly. And the food smelled good. Better than the processed sugar she was constantly shoveling into her mouth. Slowly, hesitantly, she gave a small, jerky nod. Naruto smiled. He tossed the loaf to her, which she caught with surprising dexterity. He then slid the pot of fish across the floor towards her. She took a piece of bread, carefully placed a small morsel of fish on it, and took a tentative bite. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The rich, salty flavor, combined with the soft bread, was a revelation. It was real food. It tasted of the sea, of life. They sat in silence for several minutes, sharing the simple meal. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, a shared moment of peace in the heart of a gilded cage. I had a sister, Kurone said suddenly, her voice quiet and soft, barely a whisper. It was the first time Naruto had heard her speak more than a single word. Naruto stopped chewing, giving her his full attention. Yeah, her name was Akame, Kurone continued, her gaze distant, fixed on a memory. We were always together. We were supposed to be the strongest. The best. But she betrayed the empire. She left me. The words were spoken without emotion, a simple recitation of fact. But Naruto could feel the deep, cavernous wound behind them. The pain of abandonment. She had red eyes, Kurone finished, her voice trailing off. She looked up at Naruto. Like the girl you fought. Naruto's heart clenched. Akame. The assassin from Night Raid. Her sister. This world was smaller and more tangled than he thought. He remembered the look in Akame's eyes when he disarmed her, the shock. The confusion. He thought of her now, a silent assassin fighting a war, and her sister, a child soldier on the opposite side, eating her pain away with sweets. The endless, stupid cycle of hatred had poisoned them, too. My best friend left me once, Naruto said softly, thinking of Sasuke. He thought he had to walk a dark path alone to get strong. He broke every bond we had. I never gave up on him. I spent years chasing him, fighting him, trying to drag him back into the light. Kurone looked at him, her dark eyes holding a flicker of genuine curiosity. Did you? Yeah, Naruto said, a sad smile on his face. In the end, I did. Sometimes, people leave because they think it's the only way to protect you. Or because they're lost. It doesn't always mean they've stopped caring. He didn't offer any more advice. He didn't preach. He just shared a piece of his own story, a piece of his own pain. He had planted a seed. A small, fragile idea that maybe, just maybe, her sister's betrayal wasn't as simple as she had been led to believe. Kuron said nothing more, but she finished her bread and fish slowly, thoughtfully. When Naruto finally stood up to leave, she gave him another one of her small, almost invisible nods. It was a gesture of thanks. A connection had been made, forged not in battle, but over a shared meal and a shared loneliness. Naruto found Esdeath waiting for him, dressed not in her uniform or training gear, but in a simple, practical traveler's cloak over a dark blue dress. It was a surprisingly civilian look for her. She was impatient, tapping her foot. "Are you ready?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Your walk awaits." "Ready," he confirmed. They left the palace, and for once, Naruto didn't have to sneak. They walked out the front gates, just the two of them. Her presence alone was enough to ward off anyone who might think to stop them. Guards snapped to attention and then stared in disbelief as the fearsome General Esdeath strolled, led out of the palace grounds accompanied only by her strange, blonde-haired fiancé. They walked through the pristine inner city, then through the gates into the slums. The change in atmosphere was immediate. But this time, something was different. The listless despair was still there, but it was punctuated by pockets of activity. Naruto's clones, fewer in number today but still active, were working alongside the citizens, repairing homes, cleaning streets, and organizing the remaining food supplies. Esdeath watched it all with a detached, clinical curiosity. "You have made them dependent on you," she observed. "When you leave, they will be weaker than before." "I'm not trying to make them dependent," Naruto countered, leading her down a narrow, winding alley. "I'm trying to show them what's possible. Hope isn't a crutch, Esdeath. It's fuel. It gives them the strength to start helping themselves." He gestured to a group of men who were working with one of his clones to rethatch a roof. Yesterday, they would have just let it leak. Today, they're working together. That's strength. The strength of community. She didn't look convinced. To her, a community was just a collection of weak individuals, a bigger target. A pack of sheep is still just sheep. They will scatter at the first sign of a wolf. Maybe, Naruto conceded, but sometimes, a pack of sheep, when they stand together, can convince a wolf it's better off hunting somewhere else. He led her to the edge of the capital, near the sparsely populated farmlands that huddled against the outer walls. They stopped at a small, struggling village. Little more than a dozen dilapidated houses around a muddy well. The people here were gaunt, their fields barren. The imperial tax collectors had been through recently, taking most of their harvest and their seed grain for the next planting. The villagers saw Esdeath impaled, their faces masks of pure terror. They knew who she was. The Ice Queen, the Butcher of the North. They scrambled to hide in their homes, barring their doors. "You see," Esdeath said, a hint of triumph in her voice. "This is the natural order. They are weak. They fear the strong. It is how it should be." Naruto ignored her, walking to the center of the village. He closed his eyes, focusing. He drove his hands into the dry, cracked earth. A soft, green chakra began to glow around his hands, seeping into the ground. It was a gentle application of his life-giving yang energy, a technique he had learned but rarely had cause to use. The ground around him began to change. The dry soil darkened, becoming rich and moist. Tiny green shoots began to poke through the earth, growing at an unnatural rate. Within minutes, a 20-foot radius of barren field around him was covered in young, healthy vegetable sprouts. The villagers, peeking through their windows, gasped. One old man, his face a roadmap of hardship, slowly opened his door and took a tentative step outside, his eyes wide with disbelief. Naruto stood up, brushing the dirt from his hands. "This is nurturing, Esdeath. You don't have to burn a field to prove you're stronger than it. You can help it grow. A thriving village pays its taxes, provides soldiers, strengthens the empire far more than a dead one." He was speaking her language now. Not morality, pragmatism, the logic of strength. Esdeath stared at the impossible patch of green, then at Naruto. Her mind, so used to a simple, brutal calculus, was being forced to entertain a new, complex variable. Strength through creation, not just destruction. It was an alien concept. But the proof was right in front of her. Suddenly, a roar ripped through the air. From the scrubland just beyond the village, a massive creature burst forth. It was a class-4 danger beast, a gorillafant. A monstrous hybrid with the size of an elephant and the muscular, aggressive build of a giant ape. It had likely been drawn by the sudden burst of life energy. It bellowed, its eyes red with mindless rage, and charged directly at the village. The remaining villagers screamed in terror. Esdeath's eyes lit up, her hand instinctively going to the rapier at her side, her battle lust instantly ignited. Finally, some entertainment. Wait, Naruto commanded, holding up a hand. He turned to her, a serious look on his face. Let's work together. You handle offense. I'll handle defense. Protect the village. Not just the people, the village, the homes, the fields. Everything. It was a challenge. A test. Could she use her immense power for something other than annihilation? Esdeath hesitated for a second, then a wide, predatory grin spread across her face. A battle with you by my side. An interesting proposal. Very well. Let's dance, Naruto. The gorillafant was upon them. It swung a colossal fist, aiming to crush the very well that was the village's only source of water. Now, Naruto yelled. Esdeath moved like a bolt of lightning. She didn't create a massive ice spike to impale it. Instead, with a flick of her rapier, she launched a series of small, precise ice projectiles that struck the beast's joints, its elbow, its shoulder, its wrist. They weren't powerful enough to kill, but they were cold enough to flash freeze the joints, locking them in place. The massive fist stopped dead in midair, just inches from the well. The beast roared in frustration and pain, trying to wrench its arm free. It swung its other arm, a wild, sweeping blow that would have leveled 3 houses. Naruto was already there. He slammed his palms together. Sage art. Wood style. Great wall jutsu. From the ground erupted a thick, interwoven wall of solid wood, catching the danger beast's fist with a deafening crack. The wall groaned under the impact but held firm, shielding the fragile homes completely. My turn, Esdeath shouted with glee. She stomped her heel on the ground. A sheet of ice spread rapidly across the earth, freezing the gorillafant's feet to the spot, anchoring it. The beast was trapped, immobilized. It thrashed wildly, but it was caught. Finish it, Naruto said. Esdeath pointed her rapier. For a moment, Naruto thought she would summon one of her massive glaciers. Instead, a single, long, needle-thin icicle, no thicker than his finger, formed in the air. It shot forward with incredible speed and pierced the danger beast's eye, burrowing deep into its brain. The colossal creature shuddered, let out one last, rattling breath, and then collapsed, its dead weight shaking the ground. It was over in less than 30 seconds. The village was untouched. The people were safe. The threat was eliminated with surgical precision and minimal collateral damage. They stood over the corpse of the beast, Esdeath's chest heaving slightly, her face flushed with the thrill of battle. She looked at Naruto, her eyes shining. That was, she began, searching for the word. Efficient. Incredibly efficient. It was teamwork, Naruto corrected her gently. He looked around at the pristine village. Then at the villagers who were slowly, cautiously emerging from their homes, their terror replaced by awe. See, strength isn't just about overwhelming power. It's about control. It's about achieving your objective without destroying everything around you. He turned to the villagers. The beast is dead. You're safe. This meat should feed you for weeks. The old man from before approached them, bowing low, his hands trembling. Thank you, Lord Uzumaki. Thank you, General. You saved us. Esdeath looked at the bowing old man. For the first time in her life, she was being thanked not out of terror, but out of genuine gratitude. She had protected the weak. And she had to admit, the feeling, it wasn't unpleasant. It was a different kind of victory, but a victory nonetheless. The experience changed something in her. The foundation of her philosophy, the unshakable belief that the weak exist only to be culled, had developed its first hairline crack. She still believed in the primacy of strength. But Naruto was forcing her to reconsider what the word truly meant. Their walk back to the capital was different. The silence was less tense, more contemplative. When they arrived at the palace gates, they were met by a panicked-looking wave. General, Lord Uzumaki, there's a situation, he stammered. What is it, Wave? Esdeath asked, her commander's persona snapping back into place. It's Great General Budo. He's in the main plaza. He's calling for you, Lord Uzumaki. By name. He's declared you an outlaw and a threat to the Imperial Order. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He had known this was coming. He was a foreign body, and the Empire's immune system was finally mounting a response. They found him in the center of the vast, marble plaza before the palace. General Budo was a mountain of a man. His presence as immense and immovable as his reputation. He stood alone, his arms crossed over his chest, his crimson and gold armor gleaming. The Taigu Adramelech, a set of powerful gauntlets and greaves, seemed to hum with contained power, arcs of purple lightning occasionally dancing across their surface. The plaza had been cleared. Thousands of soldiers surrounded the perimeter, a silent, disciplined wall of steel. High above, on the palace balconies, nobles and ministers, including a smirking Minister Honest, had gathered to watch the show. Naruto Uzumaki. Budo's voice boomed across the plaza, a sound like grinding consonants. You have come to our city, a foreign agent of unknown allegiance. You have defied imperial law, undermined the authority of the guard, and incited the peasantry with your cheap theatrics. You are a chaotic element that threatens the stability of this empire. I, Great General Budo, commander of the Imperial Guard, Arabi, challenge you to a duel of judgment. This was it, a direct, public challenge from the Empire's other strongest warrior. This wasn't a game or a philosophical debate. This was a battle for dominance. For the right to exist in this city. Esdeath stepped forward, a dangerous glint in her eye. Budo, you are overstepping. He is with me. He is a threat to the Empire. Esdeath, Budo countered, his gaze never leaving Naruto. Your personal affections are irrelevant to the security of the throne. This is a matter of law and order, concepts you have long since disregarded. The jab was clear. The rivalry between the two great generals was well known. Naruto placed a hand on Esdeath's shoulder. It's okay. This is my fight. He walked forward, stopping 30 paces from the armored giant. I accept your challenge, General Budo. But know this. I am not an agent of chaos. I am the bringer of a new kind of order. One that doesn't require the people to live in fear. Budo snorted, a sound of pure disdain. Words are for politicians. We are warriors. Let your fist speak for your order. He slammed his gauntleted fists together. A deafening crack of thunder echoed across the plaza, and a massive aura of purple lightning exploded around him. The very air became thick and heavy with ozone. Adramelech is the Emperor's divine punishment. Prepare to be judged. Naruto closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He gathered the natural energy around him. When he opened them, the orange pigmentation of sage mode surrounded his eyes, and his pupils were the cross slits of a toad sage. A visible aura of golden, flame-like chakra erupted around him, pushing back against the oppressive pressure of Budo's lightning. The crowd of soldiers and nobles gasped. The power radiating from the two men was immense, a physical force that warped the air between them. Budo charged. He didn't run. He was a thunderbolt given human form. He crossed the distance in a fraction of a second, his fist cocked back. Trailing arcs of raw lightning. Supreme lightning strike. He threw the punch. It was a blow that could shatter a mountain. Naruto met it. He didn't try to block it head-on. He caught Budo's wrist with one hand. His sage-enhanced strength just enough to hold the titanic blow. With his other hand, he formed a Rasengan in an instant. He didn't shove it into Budo's chest. He slammed it directly into the side of Adramelech's gauntlet. The explosion was blinding. The spinning chakra of the Rasengan met the raging lightning of the Taigu. The resulting detonation was a concussive blast of energy that cracked the marble plaza beneath them and sent a shockwave that threw the first few rows of soldiers off their feet. Budo was thrown back, skidding to a halt, his arm numb. He stared at his gauntlet. There was a spiderweb of cracks in the supposedly indestructible metal. Impossible. No one has ever damaged Adramelech. Your armor is strong, General, Naruto said, his voice calm, amplified by his chakra. But it's just armor. It can be broken. He vanished. Using his sage mode speed, he appeared directly behind Budo. He threw a kick aimed at the back of the general's knee. Budo, his instincts honed by 100 battles, spun, blocking the kick with his greave. The impact sent another thunderous boom across the plaza. The battle became a cataclysmic blur. It was a true clash of titans. Budo's every attack was a stroke of lightning, a clap of thunder, his power immense and overwhelming. Naruto was a golden phantom, a whirlwind of motion. He flowed around the general's furious assault, his sage mode giving him the precognition to stay one step ahead. He didn't have Budo's raw destructive power, but he had speed, technique, and a versatility the general couldn't match. "Stand still and face me like a man," Budo roared, unleashing a wave of lightning from his palms. Naruto created two shadow clones. One clone formed a Rasengan, the other a second one. The real Naruto grabbed both of their wrists, smashing the two spinning orbs together. Sage art. Massive Rasengan. The resulting sphere was colossal, a miniature sun of pure chakra. He met Budo's lightning wave with it. The collision of the two ultimate attacks tore the plaza apart. A dome of white and purple energy erupted, vaporizing the ground and sending plumes of smoke and dust high into the air. When the dust settled, both men were panting, standing in the center of a newly formed crater. Budo's armor was smoking, more cracks appearing on its surface. Naruto's sage mode cloak was flickering. "You are strong, Uzumaki," Budo admitted, his voice holding a note of grudging respect. "Stronger than I imagined, but this is the power of the empire itself you face. You cannot win." He raised his hands to the sky, and the clouds above the capital began to darken, swirling into a vortex. Lightning flashed within them, drawn by the power of his Taigu. "Behold the heavens, fury. This is my ultimate technique. Divine judgment." Naruto looked up at the raging storm. He knew he couldn't block this. He had to surpass it. He closed his eyes, drawing on a deeper power, the gift of the Sage of Six Paths himself. A new, more powerful chakra flooded his system. The orange pigmentation around his eyes vanished. His pupils became a cross of toad sage and nine-tailed slits. A brilliant, golden cloak of pure energy erupted around him, more intense than before, with the Magatama symbols of the Sage of Six Paths appearing on his collar. 9 black truth-seeking orbs materialized, hovering silently behind his back. He floated off the ground, a divine being bathed in golden light. The nobles on the balcony stared, their mouths agape. Minister Honest's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, abject terror. Esdeath watched, her heart pounding, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and possessive pride. That was the power she had felt, the sun buried beneath the snow. Budo, even in the face of this divine transformation, did not waver. "Impressive theatrics, but they will not save you. Fall." He thrust his hands downward. From the heavens, a single, colossal bolt of lightning, as thick as the palace's central tower, descended with unimaginable speed, aimed directly at Naruto. Naruto raised one hand. A single truth-seeking orb flew up to meet the bolt. It made no sound. The colossal lightning strike, a blow that could have glassed the entire plaza, simply vanished. It was absorbed, negated, utterly erased by the small, black sphere. Silence. A profound, deafening silence fell over the plaza. Before Budo could even process what had happened, Naruto was in front of him. He wasn't moving fast. He had simply appeared there. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't form a Rasengan. He simply placed his open palm on Budo's chest plate. A wave of calm, overwhelming energy flowed from his hand. It wasn't destructive. It was absolute. The mighty Taigu Adramelech, the symbol of the Empire's wrath, short-circuited. The lightning died. The armor plating cracked and fell away in chunks, clattering to the ground, leaving Budo standing in his undersuit, disarmed and utterly defeated. Naruto removed his hand. He had not harmed the man. Only his weapon, his armor, his pride. Budo fell to his knees, not from injury, but from the sheer shock of his complete and total defeat. He stared at his bare hands, then up at the golden, god-like being floating before him. I am defeated," he whispered, the words tasting like poison. Naruto's golden cloak receded, the truth-seeking orbs dissolving. He floated back to the ground, standing before the kneeling general as just a man again. "I told you," Naruto said, his voice echoing in the silent plaza. "I'm not here to destroy your empire. I'm here to save it from itself." He looked up at the balconies, his gaze sweeping over the terrified nobles and the furious minister. The age of ruling through fear and corruption is over. A new dawn is coming. You can either stand with it, or be washed away by the tide. He had done it. In full view of the capital's entire power structure, he had defeated the invincible great general Budo without killing him. He had shattered the myth of the empire's unassailable might and announced himself not as a rebel or a terrorist, but as a new and undeniable authority. He turned and walked away from the kneeling general, back towards Esdeath, who was watching him with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. He hadn't just won a duel. He had won the board. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. An Unholy Trinity. The defeat of great General Budo sent a seismic shockwave through the empire's political landscape. It wasn't the violence of the act that was so devastating, but the profound lack of it. A rebel could be martyred, an invader repelled. But what do you do with a man who holds the power to shatter your strongest warrior and instead chooses to simply disarm him? How do you fight an enemy who refuses to be your enemy? Naruto Uzumaki was no longer just Esdeath's strange fiancé or a folk hero of the slums. He was now, in the eyes of the capital, a living god. The immediate aftermath was chaos. The nobles on the balconies had fled in terror, whispering of demons and deities. Minister Honest had retreated to the labyrinthine depths of his own paranoia, his face a pasty mask of fury and fear. He had tried to have Naruto declared a traitor and executed, and had instead given him the grandest possible stage to demonstrate his terrifying power. The minister's subtle webs of influence felt flimsy and useless against a man who could command the heavens. In the plaza, Budo remained on his knees for a long time, staring at the shattered remains of his Taigu. His life's purpose, his identity as the unbreachable shield of the empire, had been dismantled. Yet, he was alive, unharmed. The mercy was a greater blow than any physical strike. It forced him to confront a question that had never before entered his mind. Was his unswerving loyalty sworn to the empire, or to the corrupt men who currently ran it? Naruto, flanked by a silent and visibly impressed Esdeath, walked back into the palace not as a guest, but as a conqueror who had claimed his territory without shedding a drop of blood. That, Esdeath finally said as they entered her chambers, her voice a low, odd whisper, was the most magnificent thing I have ever witnessed. Her usual predatory excitement was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant respect that bordered on worship. She had wanted a man who could match her strength. She had found one who dwarfed it. A man who treated a battle against one of the Empire's pillars as a mere demonstration. It was a message, Naruto said, weariness finally seeping into his bones. The Six Paths Sage mode took its toll. A drain not just on his chakra but on his spirit. He collapsed into a plush chair, the adrenaline from the fight fading. To Honest, to the nobles, to everyone. Things are going to change. You haven't changed anything, Esdeath countered, pouring 2 glasses of wine, her movements fluid and deliberate. She handed one to him. You've merely replaced one fear with another. They don't fear the Empire's laws anymore. They fear you. Naruto took the glass, staring into the dark red liquid. Maybe, but fear of one just man is better than fear of 1,000 corrupt ones. At least my judgment will be fair. He took a long drink. The wine was rich and bitter. For the next few days, an uneasy truce settled over the capital. Naruto's clones continued their work, now they moved with an undeniable authority. The Imperial Guard gave them a wide berth. Corrupt merchants found their hoarded goods reallocated, with no one to appeal to. The slums saw more improve, meant in a week than they had in a century. Naruto had, in effect, carved out his own kingdom within the city, one governed by his own simple, direct form of justice. Leone was his primary source of intelligence. They met often, usually on a high rooftop overlooking the sprawling city, a neutral ground between the world of the palace and the world of the rebellion. You've really kicked the hornet's nest, Sunshine, she said one afternoon, leaning back on her hands, a grin plastered on her face. Night Raid is in an uproar. Half of them want to recruit you, the other half thinks you're a bigger threat than the minister. What does your boss think? Naruto asked, his gaze distant. Najanda, Leone sighed. She's pragmatic. She sees you as an unstoppable force that's currently aimed in the right direction. She's adopted a wait-and-see approach. But she's wary. Power like yours, it corrupts. She's seen it happen. She's not wrong to be, Naruto admitted. It's a heavy weight. Leone grew serious. Speaking of which, Akame's report on you was vague. All she'd say was that you were not the target. For Akame, that's practically a glowing recommendation. She's been quiet ever since. Spends more time in the kitchen. You really got under her skin. Naruto thought of Kurome, alone in the pantry, and the chasm of pain between the two sisters. I'm not her enemy, Leone. I don't want to be anyone's enemy. But I'm not going to stand by and watch this country tear itself apart. Their conversation was cut short by a strange, piercing sound. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the din of the city like a hot knife through wax. It was a high-frequency tone that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. All across the capital, people stopped, looking around in confusion. Then, the broadcasts began. Every Vox caster in the city, the magical communication devices used by the Empire for propaganda, flickered to life. But it wasn't the usual booming voice of an imperial announcer. It was silence. A deep, profound, electronic silence. On the public viewing plates, the imperial crest was replaced by a stark, black screen. Naruto and Leone exchanged a look of alarm. Naruto's sage mode flared to life, his senses spreading out, trying to find the source. He couldn't. The energy was everywhere and nowhere, a blanket of alien interference that smothered the city's natural pulse. Then, a new symbol faded into view on the black screens. It was a perfect, white circle with a single, vertical line running through its center. It was simple, geometric, and utterly devoid of emotion. A voice followed. It was not male or female. It was a synthesized, perfectly modulated tone, speaking with an unnerving, calm precision. Inhabitants of this designated world, it began, the voice echoing from every Vox caster in the Empire. From the capital to the farthest northern villages. We are the celestial arbiters. Your existence has been placed under review. A collective gasp went through the city. On the rooftop, Leone's blood ran cold. Arbiters, what the hell is that? The review is complete, the voice continued, without a hint of drama. This world has been found to be contaminated. The proliferation of Taigu, reality-warping artifacts of unstable origin, has reached a critical threshold. The presence of extra-dimensional anomalies, Naruto felt a jolt, as if the voice were speaking directly to him, has further destabilized the local reality matrix. The potential for a cascade failure is unacceptable. The voice paused, a moment of perfect, terrifying silence. Therefore, a verdict has been rendered. This world is scheduled for sterilization. The process will begin with the systematic purging of all primary contaminants. All Taigu users and anomalous energy signatures they've been marked for immediate termination. This is not a declaration of war. It is a statement of sanitation. There will be no negotiation. There will be no surrender. There will only be order. To demonstrate the point, the image on the viewing plates changed. It showed a satellite view of a small, fortified island off the southern coast, Fortress Ishgar, home to a reclusive imperial general and his powerful, cannon-based Taigu. As the entire empire watched, a thin, white line of light descended from the heavens. It was impossibly bright, impossibly clean. It touched the island. There was no explosion, no sound. The island and everything on it, the fortress, the general, the Taigu, the very rock itself, simply dissolved. It was erased from existence, leaving behind only calm, undisturbed ocean water. The light vanished. The screen went back to the symbol of the circle and the line. The process has begun, the voice stated calmly. Compliance is irrelevant. The broadcast ended. The Vox casters went silent. The viewing plates went dark. For a full minute, the entire capital was silent. The bustling, chaotic city was frozen in a state of collective, existential shock. They had just witnessed a display of power so absolute, so impersonal, it made the might of Esdeath or Budo seem like a child's tantrum. This wasn't a rival nation or a revolution. This was a force that could unmake the world with a casual gesture. Then, the screaming started. Panic erupted on a scale Naruto had never seen. The fragile order he had built collapsed into pure, primal terror. People ran through the streets, trampling one another, their minds broken by the sheer, cosmic horror of what they had just seen. Leone, Naruto's voice cut through her shock. Go, get to your people. Najanda needs to know what's happening. This changes everything. Leone was already moving, her face pale but her eyes filled with a grim resolve. "You got it, sunshine." She gave him one last look. "Be careful." It sounded like they were talking about you. She leapt from the roof, vanishing into the chaos below. Naruto didn't wait. He shot back towards the palace, a golden blur. He found Esdeath in the war room with her Jaegers. The usual arrogance and confidence had been wiped from their faces, replaced by varying shades of shock and fear. Even Esdeath looked unsettled. Her entire philosophy was built on the law of the strong devouring the weak. But what did that mean when faced with a predator that could devour the planet itself? "They marked us," Wave was saying, his voice trembling. "All Taigu users. They're going to just erase us. This is an outrage," Saryu declared, though her usual fervor was laced with panic. "This is the ultimate form of evil. It must be judged." "How do you judge a bolt of light from the sky, you fool?" Dr. Stylish shrieked, his composure completely gone. "Enough." Esdeath's voice cracked like a whip, silencing them. Her eyes found Naruto as he entered. The fear was gone, replaced by a familiar, terrifying gleam. It wasn't battle lust, it was the look of a beast that has just met a worthy predator. "Naruto, what was that?" "That," Naruto said, his face grim as he remembered the sensation from the alleyway, from the dimensional rift, as our new enemy. "And they're not from this world." He looked around at the assembled Jaegers. "That broadcast is the only warning we're going to get. They're coming for all of you. For anyone with a Taigu." As if on cue, a proximity alarm blared through the palace. A soldier burst in. "General, unidentified hostiles. They just appeared inside the outer palace walls. They're engaging the guards." Esdeath grinned, a wild, almost insane expression. "Good. Let them come. Let's see what these arbiters are made of." She drew her rapier. "Jaegers, to battle. Let's give them a true imperial welcome." They raced to the outer courtyards to find a scene of chillingly efficient slaughter. The hostiles were not soldiers. They were tall, slender, crystalline humanoids. They had no faces, only smooth, reflective surfaces that mirrored the terror of the guards they were cutting down. They moved with a silent, synchronized grace, their limbs elongating into razor-sharp blades. The Imperial Guard's swords shattered against their crystalline bodies. Bullets ricocheted harmlessly. They were a relentless, implacable tide of death. "For the Empire!" Wave yelled, activating his Taigu, Grand Chariot. Clad in the black armor, he charged into the fray, his spear lashing out. He managed to knock one of the crystalline soldiers back, but another one's arm morphed into a whip-like blade, catching him across the chest plate and sending him flying, sparks erupting from his armor. The Jaegers engaged, and the courtyard became a chaotic battlefield. Bowles unleashed his flamethrower, rubicant, bathing the creatures in fire. It did nothing. They walked through the inferno, their bodies glowing cherry red but remaining undamaged. Saryu's missiles exploded against them, barely scratching their surfaces. Kurone's swordplay was masterful, but she couldn't find a weak point to exploit. These things weren't just strong. They were adaptive. They were analyzing their opponents. One of the creatures, after being struck by Wave, reformed its arm into a blunt, hammer-like appendage to counter his armor's piercing resistance. Esdeath rose a dozen of them solid with a wave of her hand. "Shatter," she commanded, but before the ice could break, the crystalline beings vibrated at an incredible frequency, generating enough internal heat to melt the ice from within. They were immune to her cold. She stared, her grin finally faltering. Her ultimate power, her absolute dominion over ice, was useless against them. Naruto knew he couldn't hold back. He entered Six Paths Sage mode, the golden cloak erupting around him. He shot into the heart of the enemy formation. He didn't use a Rasengan. He used the truth-seeking orbs. He shaped one into a long, sharp spear and thrust it forward. The spear pierced one of the crystalline soldiers through the chest. Unlike every other attack, this one worked. The creature's body began to destabilize around the wound, its crystalline structure dissolving into nothingness. "They're weak to his power," Wave shouted. The remaining creatures all stopped. Their faceless heads all turned in perfect unison to face Naruto. They had identified the primary threat. In a single, coordinated movement, they abandoned their fight with the Jaegers and swarmed him. "Naruto!" Esdeath screamed, a genuine note of fear in her voice. Naruto became a golden vortex of destruction. He wielded his truth-seeking orbs as extensions of his own will, shaping them into shields, blades, and projectiles. He was a god of battle, erasing the arbiters, foot soldiers one by one, but for every one he destroyed, two more seemed to materialize from thin air. This was just a vanguard, a scouting party, and it was taking all of his focus to hold them back. He needed to end this. He needed to talk. He brought all 9 orbs together, forming a flat, circular platform beneath his feet. He shot into the sky, drawing the attention of every combatant. "Stop this," he yelled, his voice amplified by chakra, booming across the battlefield. "I know you can hear me, arbiters. I am the anomaly you're looking for. Face me directly. This fight is with me, not them." Quote. The crystalline soldiers on the ground paused, their forms flickering. The attack was being called off. High above, in the clouds, the air began to shimmer and distort. A figure descended. It was not crystalline. It looked vaguely humanoid, clad in stark white armor that seemed to be woven from solidified light. It wore a helmet that completely obscured its face, marked only with the same symbol from the broadcast, the circle and the vertical line. This was the Arbiter, the being whose voice had passed judgment on their world. It radiated an aura of calm, absolute power that dwarfed its soldiers, an energy that made Naruto's own six-path sage mode feel like a candle next to a sun. The anomaly. Naruto Uzumaki, the Arbiter's synthesized voice echoed in Naruto's mind. A direct telepathic link. You are an entity of borrowed, chaotic power. A cancer transplanted from another reality. Your very presence accelerates this world's decay. I'm here to save this world. Naruto projected back, his own thoughts a defiant roar. Your definition of saving is irrelevant, the Arbiter replied, its tone unchanging. You introduce foreign concepts, foreign energies. You disrupt the natural, predictable flow of entropy. Order is the slow, inevitable heat death of all things. You are a source of uncontrolled heat. Therefore, you must be extinguished. The Arbiter raised a hand. Reality itself seemed to bend around it. This is your only chance. Allow yourself to be erased. It will be painless. Naruto laughed, a harsh, defiant sound. I've had go. DS and monsters tell me to lie down and die before. It never works out well for them. If you want me gone, you'll have to do it yourself. So be it, the Arbiter said. It flicked its wrist. Naruto's sage-enhanced senses screamed. He threw up a shield with 3 of his truth-seeking orbs. An invisible, unstoppable force slammed into it. The shield, which could negate any ninjutsu, buckled. Cracks appeared in the absolute defense. Naruto was sent hurtling backward, the force of the blow rattling him to his very core. This being wasn't using chakra or taigu energy. It was manipulating the fundamental forces of the universe. Gravity, kinetics, space-time. It was on a level he had only ever seen Kagaya approach. He stabilized himself, his mind racing. He couldn't win this fight. Not alone. Not now. He was powerful, but this Arbiter was something else entirely. It was a universal constant given form. He needed to retreat. He needed a new plan. He needed allies. Real ones. With a final, defiant glare at the Arbiter, Naruto shot down towards the palace, grabbing a stunned Esdeath by the arm. We have to go, now. He pulled her with him, his clones creating a massive smokescreen to cover their retreat. They fled into the city, leaving the Jaegers and the remaining Imperial forces to face the silent, terrifying judgment of the Arbiter, who simply watched them go, as if their flight was an interesting but ultimately meaningless variable in a vast equation. That night, in a hidden, reinforced bunker deep beneath the slums, one of Night Raid's secure safehouses, an impossible meeting took place. The air was thick with a tension that was practically explosive. On one side of a steel table sat Naginda, her face grim, flanked by a silent, watchful Akame and a fidgeting, anxious Leone. On the other side sat Esdeath, her arms crossed, radiating a cold, murderous fury at being forced to hide underground like a rat. And at the head of the table, standing between the two opposing forces, was Naruto. This is insane, Uzumaki. Naginda said, her voice a low rasp. Bringing her here, she has slaughtered hundreds of our allies. She is the embodiment of everything we are fighting against. And you are the leader of a terrorist cell that has assassinated countless Imperial officials, Esdeath retorted, her voice dripping with venom. If you were not currently useful to Naruto, I would freeze your heart in your chest where you sit. Enough. Naruto's voice cut through the hatred, sharp and commanding. He slammed his hand on the table, the steel groaning under the impact. Look around you. Your war is over. It's meaningless now. He paced before them, his energy a caged storm. Did you not see what happened today? Did you not hear the message? There is a new player on the board, and they are not here to take a side. They are here to wipe the board clean. They are coming for you, Naginda, and your Taigu users. They are coming for you, Esdeath, and yours. They are coming for this entire planet. Your petty squabbles over who gets to rule the ashes are over. The stark, brutal truth of his words hung in the air, silencing them both. He's right, Leone spoke up, her usual bravado gone, replaced by a grim seriousness. I saw those things. They're not soldiers. They're exterminators. Akame, who had been silent until now, spoke, her red eyes fixed on Naruto. You fought their leader. Can he be defeated? Naruto met her gaze. He didn't lie. Alone. No, I don't think so. He's on another level, but together, we might have a chance. He looked from Naginda to Esdeath, his expression imploring. I know you hate each other. I know you have every reason to want to kill each other. But your hatred won't stop a beam of light from orbit. Your pride won't stop an army that can't be burned, frozen, or cut. Divided, you will all be sanitized, purged, erased. He leaned forward, his hands on the table, his gaze locking with each of them in turn. But together, you have Revolutionary Army's numbers and intel network, he said to Naginda. You have the best of the Empire's elite soldiers and its military resources, he said to Esdeath. And you have me. He offered them not a truce, but a new path. A third option born of absolute necessity. We form an alliance. A new faction. Not empire. Not revolution. A united front for the survival of this world. We fight them, together. We drive them back. And when it's over, we build something new. Something better than this rotten empire. Something that lasts. The room was silent. Naginda stared at him, her strategic mind calculating the insane, impossible odds. Esdeath stared at him, the thought of fighting alongside her ultimate rival against a force of gods a thrilling, intoxicating poison. It was Akame who made the first move. She looked at Naruto, at the sincerity in his eyes, the memory of his mercy in the plaza still fresh in her mind. She thought of her sister, and the new, fragile hope he had planted in her own heart. She stood up and gave a slight bow to Naruto. Night Raid was formed to save the people from a corrupt empire. This is a greater corruption. A greater threat. I will follow you, Naruto. Leone grinned, slapping the table. Well, I'm with him. Fighting aliens and saving the world sounds a hell of a lot more fun than just stabbing nobles. I'm in. All eyes turned to the two leaders. Naginda let out a long, weary sigh, the smoke from her cigarette curling towards the ceiling. She looked at Esdeath's hateful glare, then at Naruto's determined face. To save the world, what a ridiculously grand ambition. A small, grim smile touched her lips. Fine, on the condition that once this is over, the empire is dismantled and a new, democratic government is formed. Agreed, Naruto said instantly. Now, only one remained. Esdeath. She hadn't moved, her face a mask of cold fury. And what do I get from this alliance? She sneered. Besides the pleasure of breathing the same air as this revolutionary filth. Naruto looked her straight in the eye. He didn't offer her power or land. He offered her the one thing he knew she truly craved. The greatest challenge of your life, he said, his voice a low, intense promise. A war against gods. A chance to prove that we, are the strongest force in this universe. A battle so glorious it will be sung about for 1,000 years. He leaned in closer. And you get to fight it by my side. Her cold exterior cracked. A slow, terrifyingly beautiful smile spread across her face. The fire was back in her eyes, burning brighter and hotter than ever before. A war against gods. She breathed the words, savoring them. Now that is a prize worth fighting for. She stood up, her regal presence filling the small bunker. Very well, I accept. I will join your little band. She pointed a sharp finger at Naginda. But understand this, I do this for him, and for the thrill of the battle. The moment this is over, our truce is finished. We'll see, Naruto said, a confident smile on his face. He had done it, the impossible. He had united the most powerful and diametrically opposed forces in the world. He had brought together the ice-cold general, the master assassin, and the lion-hearted revolutionary. It wasn't a marriage of law or of love. It was a pact forged in the fires of impending annihilation. A warrior's bond, sealed by a shared enemy and a shared, desperate hope for survival. Esdeath, Akame, Leone. They were his generals now. His partners. An unholy trinity bound to him. And together, they would wage a war against heaven itself. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. War Against Heaven. The alliance was a lit fuse in a powder keg. The first 24 hours were a masterclass in controlled hostility. Esdeath and her 3 remaining Jaegers, Wave, Kurome, and Bowles, set up their command post in one corner of Night Raid's sprawling underground base, a palpable line of ice-cold animosity separating them from the revolutionaries. Leone tried to break the tension with a joke and was met with a glare from Esdeath so frigid it could have frozen fire. Akame and Kurome saw each other for the first time in years. They stood 20 feet apart. A chasm of pain and betrayal between them, and said nothing at all. It was a silence louder than any shouting match. Naruto was the bridge, the linchpin. He moved between the two factions. A tireless whirlwind of diplomacy and command. Najinda, I need a complete list of every known Taigu user on the continent, Imperial, Rebel, or otherwise. We have to warn them, he said, pointing to a map of the Empire. Esdeath, get me a direct line to your intelligence network. The Arbiters hit an island fortress. They're not just targeting people, they're targeting locations of power. I need to know where they might strike next. Leone, spread the word in the underworld. Anyone who sees those crystal soldiers reports to us. We need eyes everywhere. Akame, I need you to scout The capital's high-energy areas, the main research facility, the palace's power core. If they want to cripple the city, they'll hit its heart. He didn't ask, he commanded. And they, caught in the undert, of his absolute certainty and the terrifying new reality, obeyed. He wasn't just a powerful fighter anymore, he was their commander, the only one with a clear vision in the face of an incomprehensible threat. He had a gravity they couldn't escape. Their first piece of actionable intelligence came from an unexpected source, a terrified minister honest. Realizing his political machinations were useless against an enemy that could unmake him from orbit, he had swallowed his pride and sent a secret communique to Esdeath. The Arbiters had not gone unnoticed by the Empire's mystical scholars. Ancient, apocryphal texts spoke of sky judges who descended when a world's foundational laws were threatened. The texts mentioned nexus points, places where the world's natural energy, what Naruto recognized as a chaotic, untamed form of nature energy, was at its strongest. The largest known nexus was at the Great Tenkanji Temple, an ancient monastery built atop a mountain in the eastern provinces. They'll strike there, Naruto said, slamming his hand on the map. They want to sever this world's connection to its own lifeblood. That's how you kill a planet. The temple is defended by the Shinsokan practitioners. A warrior monk sect, Najinda added. They're neutral, but powerful. They don't use Taigu, but their martial arts are said to be on par with the generals. It won't be enough, Esdeath said, her voice cold. Not against those things. It's a perfect place for a slaughter. A perfect place for an ambush. Then we won't let them have it, Naruto declared. We're going. All of us. Getting there was the first test of their new alliance. They used Night Raid's network to secure passage on a massive, unmarked cargo airship. The flight was a study in tension. Bullet and Wave, the two armored powerhouses, stood on opposite sides of the cargo bay, sizing each other up. Shield, Night Raid's gentle but clumsy assassin, nervously polished her giant scissors, Esdeath, occasionally glancing at Bowles, who was quietly maintaining his flamethrower, his masked face unreadable. Naruto found Leone on the ship's windy observation deck, staring out at the clouds. Nervous? He asked, coming to stand beside her. Are you kidding? I'm terrified, she admitted with a wry grin, not a trace of fear in her eyes. It was a contradiction he was coming to appreciate. We're going to fight the things that blew up an island. And I have to trust that the ice bitch won't decide to stab me in the back halfway through the fight. She won't, Naruto said with confidence. How can you be so sure? Because her pride won't let her. He explained. Right now, her number one priority is proving she's stronger than the arbiters. Betraying us would be a distraction. It would be inefficient. He gave her a small smile. And besides, I won't let her. The simple certainty in his voice was more reassuring than any promise. Leone bumped her shoulder against his. You've got this whole leader thing down, don't you, sunshine? It suits you. Inside the ship, another quiet drama was unfolding. Akame was in the galley, methodically slicing a massive danger beast steak she had insisted on bringing. Naruto had seen her retreat here and had an idea. A few minutes later, he gently nudged Kurome in the galley's direction. Go on, he said softly. Just to get some food. Kurome went, hesitantly. Shish. He entered the galley to find Akame working at the counter, her back to the door. The air thickened. Kurome opened a bag of her cookies, the crinkling sound loud in the silence. Akame didn't turn around. She finished slicing a piece of the steak, seared it perfectly on a hot plate, and placed it on a small dish. Without a word, she slid the dish down the counter to where Kurome was standing. It was an offering, a peace treaty written in the language of food. Kurome stared at the perfectly cooked meat, steam rising from it. It was just how she liked it. How Akame used to make it for her when they were children. Her hand, holding a cookie, trembled. She looked at her sister's back, at the familiar, precise movements of her knife. A single, silent tear traced a path down her cheek. She picked up the steak, took a bite, and for the first time, the food tasted not of loneliness but of memory. They arrived at Tenkanji Mountain as dusk was painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The temple was a magnificent structure. A series of pagodas and halls clinging to the mountainside, connected by winding stairs and rope bridges. It radiated an aura of profound peace and powerful nature energy. It was also a war zone. The crystalline soldiers of the arbiters were already there. They swarmed up the mountainside, a silent, glittering tide, cutting down the dark-robed warrior monks who fought bravely with spear and fist. The monks' techniques were powerful, shattering stone with their strikes, but they were useless against the adaptive crystal of the arbiters' forces. They're being slaughtered, Tatsumi, Night Raid's newest recruit, whispered in horror from the deck of the airship. Then let's even the odds, Naruto said, his voice hard. The golden cloak of his Sage of Six Paths mode erupted around him, bathing the deck in its brilliant light. This is it. No more empire versus revolution. We are the shield of this world. We fight as one. Now, let's go to work. What followed was not a battle. It was a symphony of destruction. Naruto was the conductor. He leapt from the ship, a golden comet, and slammed into the center of the largest group of arbiters. Plan B, everyone, he roared, his voice echoing across the mountain. They had drilled it on the flight. It wasn't a complex strategy. It was a simple division of labor, designed to maximize their strengths and minimize their animosity. Esdeath and Night Raid's ranged specialists, Mine and Najanda, were fire support. Ice Storm, Esdeath roared, her battle fury unleashed. A blizzard of razor-sharp ice shards, far larger and faster than her usual attacks, shredded a flank of the crystalline soldiers. This time, she didn't aim to freeze, but to pulverize, a tactic Naruto had suggested. Before the creatures could adapt, Mine, perched on a high cliff, unleashed a full-power blast from Pumpkin. The beam of spiritual energy, supercharged by her sense of righteous indignation at the slaughter, slammed into the ice-weakened soldiers, vaporizing them. Not bad, Gun Bunny, Esdeath called out, a grudging respect in her voice. Just try to keep up, Ice Queen. Mine yelled back, already sighting her next target. The armored titans, Bullet and Wave, were the vanguards. Let's show them what real armor can do. Bullet shouted, his Taigu, Incursio, gleaming. He charged down the mountain path, a demonic spear in hand, acting as a living battering ram. Right behind you, Wave yelled, activating Grand Chariot. The two of them, rivals just a day before, fought back to back, their styles meshing perfectly. Bullet's overwhelming offensive power and Wave's more balanced, defensive skills created an unbreakable wall of steel and fury. They cleared a path through the enemy, their combined might far greater than the sum of its parts. The assassins, Akame, Kurome, and Shield, were the Ghost Strike. Naruto had given them a specific instruction. He spun off 3 truth-seeking orbs, which flattened into small discs that hovered near them. These will disrupt their senses and mask your presence. They can't adapt to what they can't see. Get behind their lines. Find their command units. The 3 women became phantoms. Akame flowed through the battle like water, Murasama a black line of death. She wasn't trying to cut the creatures' bodies anymore, she was targeting the minuscule, almost invisible energy nodes at their joints. A weakness Naruto had identified. A single, precise cut, and the creatures would freeze, their internal logic disrupted, before crumbling to dust. Kurome, her movements a mirror of her sister's, fought with a deadly grace. Her Taigu, Yatsufusa, at her side. She didn't raise any corpses. The arbiters had no souls to command, but her skill with the blade was undeniable. For the first time, she and Akame were fighting on the same side, their blades weaving a dance of death that was terrifyingly beautiful. Shield, with Esdeath, was the cleanup crew. Her massive scissors could cut through anything. When Akame or Kurome disabled a creature, Shield would follow up with a single, brutal snip, bisecting the frozen crystal form and ensuring it could not regenerate. Leone and Bowls were the wild cards. Let's get wild, Leone roared, her Taigu, Lionel, activating. Her features became more feral, her strength and speed multiplying tenfold. Naruto had given her a small, controlled infusion of his own chakra. A technique he'd perfected. The golden energy wrapped around her, supercharging her Taigu beyond its limits. She became a nigh indestructible brawler, a golden-furred beast that tore through the enemy ranks. Laughing with manic glee, Bowls, his quiet demeanor a stark contrast to Leone's wildness, supported her. His flamethrower was ineffective for direct damage, but Naruto had given him a new role. Create walls of fire. Use it for area denial. Herd them. Funnel them into our kill zones. Bowls obeyed, his flamethrower now a tactical tool. He created curtains of impenetrable flame, shaping the battlefield, forcing the crystalline soldiers into the waiting attacks of the others. And Naruto was the nexus. He stood at the center of it all, a golden sun of pure power. He wasn't just fighting, he was commanding. His sage mode senses giving him a complete, 3-dimensional view of the entire battle. Wave, bullet, 30 degrees to your left. They're trying to flank you. Akame. There's a high-energy signature in the main pagoda. It's one of their commanders. Esdeath, give me a 30-meter ice wall on the western ridge. Now, he was the command center, the sensory hub, and the ultimate weapon. All in one. When a section of the line was about to break, he would be there in a flash, a recentric obliterating the threat. When a group of monks was about to be overrun, a wall of wood would erupt to protect them. He was everywhere, holding the entire, chaotic battle together through sheer force of will and tactical brilliance. They were winning. The combined, coordinated might of the empires and revolution's strongest, led by a demigod from another world, was a force the arbiters, Vanguard had not anticipated. They had expected to purge a world of squabbling primitives. They had found a hornet's nest of dragons. The tide of the battle turned. The warrior monks, inspired by the impossible display of power, rallied. The surviving monks joined the fight, their knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable, guiding the strike teams through hidden paths and forgotten tunnels. But the arbiters were not a conventional army. They did not break or rout. The IR losses simply meant a change in tactics. The remaining crystalline soldiers on the mountain all stopped. They turned towards the main pagoda at the summit, then knelt, plunging their bladed hands into the stone. The entire mountain began to groan. The nature energy that Naruto could feel, the very lifeblood of the place, was being siphoned, drained into the temple. They're not trying to destroy the Nexus. Naruto realized with a dawning horror. They're trying to use it as a power source. They're going to detonate it. High above, in the stratosphere, the Arbiter watched the battle unfold on a holographic map. It felt no frustration, no anger. Only a cold, analytical curiosity. The anomaly's combat and leadership capabilities exceed projections, it stated to the empty air of its vessel. The synergy of the native contaminants is unexpectedly high. Phase 1 has failed. Proceeding to Phase 2. Localized reality corruption. Back on the mountain, the sky above the pagoda began to shimmer, not with light, but with darkness. A sphere of pure, non-reflective black, a hole in the fabric of reality, began to form. It pulsed, drawing in the stolen nature energy. If that thing blows, it will take the whole mountain range with it. Najanda yelled over the comms link Naruto had established between them. I'm on it, Naruto said. He shot towards the summit, a golden blur. We're with you, a voice called out. He glanced back and saw 3 figures following him, effortlessly keeping pace. Esdeath, her boots sliding on self-generated ramps of ice. Akame, her movements silent and impossibly fast. Leone, her body a blur of golden fur and raw power. The 4 of them, the core of the new alliance, arrived at the pagoda's main courtyard. The sphere of darkness pulsed ominously above them. It was guarded by a new type of creature. A single, massive being, twice the size of a normal arbiter soldier, its crystalline body a deep, obsidian black. It had 4 arms, each ending in a wicked-looking blade. And it radiated an aura of pure malice. It was an elite guard, a far more powerful model. You 3, keep that thing busy, Naruto commanded. I'll handle the bomb. You think we'll have trouble with one oversized crystal? Leone cracked her knuckles, a feral grin on her face. This will be a fine hunt, Esdeath purred, her rapier gleaming. Akame said nothing, merely dropping into a low stance. Murasama held at the ready. The 3 women charged. It was a battle of legends. Esdeath attacked with overwhelming force, creating colossal ice structures to try and trap the creature, only for it to shatter them with brute strength. Leone was a blur of motion, her fists and feet slamming into the creature's body, the supercharged blows actually leaving hairline cracks in its obsidian armor. Akame was a ghost, weaving between its 4 flailing arms, searching for a single, definitive weak point. Naruto flew towards the sphere of darkness. As he got closer, he could feel its effects. It was warping reality, twisting the natural laws. Gravity would suddenly reverse, forcing him to anchor himself with chakra. The air would thin, threatening to suffocate him. It was a weapon of pure, conceptual annihilation. He couldn't destroy it with a Rasengan, that would just release the energy catastrophically. He couldn't seal it, it wasn't made of chakra. He had to dismantle it. He plunged his hands into the sphere. It was like shoving his arms into a black hole filled with broken glass. The chaotic, corrupt energy tore at him, trying to unwrite his existence. His golden cloak flickered violently. Kurama, he yelled, focusing his will inward. I need you. We need to stabilize this thing. Within his soul, the great 9-tailed fox, now fully recovered, opened its eyes. Kit, its voice boomed in his mind. You always get yourself into the most ridiculous messes. A torrent of massive, potent chakra, far purer and stronger than Naruto's own, flooded his system. Outside, Naruto's golden cloak exploded in size and intensity. The truth-seeking orb spun wildly behind him, forming a complex seal matrix. He was pouring his own chakra, and Kurama's, into the sphere, not to fight the corrupt energy, but to harmonize it, to calm it, to force it back into a stable state. It was the most delicate and draining act of chakra control he had ever attempted. Below, the fight against the Guardian was reaching its climax. The 3 women were being pushed back. The creature was simply too strong, too fast. It knocked Leone aside with a brutal backhand, sending her crashing into a stone lantern. It parried Esdeath's rapier and shattered the ice she stood on. It was about to bring all 4 of its blades down on Akame. Akame, a voice cried out. Kurome, having fought her way up the mountain, appeared. She threw herself in front of her sister, her own blade coming up to block the strike. Her sword, a normal katana, shattered on impact, but it had bought a precious second. Akame's eyes widened. Then they narrowed, a cold fire entering them. She activated her Taigu's trump card. Little war horn, she whispered. Red markings spread across her body, her physical able. Itties skyrocketing as she pushed her own life force into her blade. She was a crimson blur, moving faster than sight, her blade striking the Guardian's 4 knees in perfect, rapid succession. The creature roared as its legs buckled. The joints compromised. At the same moment, Esdeath seized the opportunity. Mahapadma, she screamed, her own ultimate technique. Time itself froze. The world turned to monochrome. The guardian was frozen in its kneeling posture. Leone, recovered and furious, her fists glowing with Naruto's chakra, appeared above it. "This is for messing with my friends," she yelled into the silent world. She brought her fists down in a devastating axe handle smash. As time resumed, the effects all hit at once. The guardian's legs shattered. Leone's blow, amplified by the frozen time, slammed its head into the stone courtyard, creating a spiderweb of cracks. The creature was broken, disabled, but not dead. High above, Naruto roared, sweat pouring down his face. He was winning. The sphere of darkness was shrinking, its chaotic energy being forced back into a stable, inert state. The Arbiter, watching from orbit, made a decision. Primary weapon has failed. Contaminant synergy is too high. Sanctioning tactical withdrawal. Purge of this world requires recalibration. The anomaly is to be reclassified from a grade 3 to a grade 5 threat. On the mountain, the broken Obsidian Guardian dissolved into black dust. The remaining crystalline soldiers all over the mountain simultaneously stopped fighting, turned, and disintegrated into glittering particles. The attack was over as suddenly as it had begun. Naruto finally collapsed the sphere of darkness into a single, inert point of light that faded from existence. Exhausted, he drifted back down to the courtyard. He landed in the middle of his victorious, battered, and utterly dysfunctional team. Night Raid and the Jaegers were making their way up the mountain, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. They had won. They had faced down the vanguard of a cosmic god and they had won. Leone was helping a groaning Bullet to his feet. Esdeath was staring at the spot where the guardian had vanished, a look of frustrated hunger on her face. Kurone was standing awkwardly near Akame, who had deactivated her trump card and was leaning on her sword, panting. Naruto looked at the scene. They were a mess. They were rivals and enemies, held together by nothing more than his will and a shared threat. But they had fought together. They had saved each other. They had won. The head monk of the Tenkinji Temple, an ancient man with a long white beard, approached him and bowed low. "You have saved our temple, and our world, from a darkness we could not comprehend. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Naruto just shook his head. Too tired to speak, he looked at his strange, impossible army. At Esdeath, whose gaze on him was now one of pure, unadulterated possessiveness and awe. At Akame, who met his eyes and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of respect, a silent acknowledgement of the debt she now owed her sister, and him. At Leone, who gave him a wide, bloody grin and a thumbs up. They had survived the first battle. But they all knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. The war for their world had just begun. Chapter 6 End.